While we're waiting for the camera, we have a lot of people in attendance this evening, which is great. I want to make sure that if anybody plans on speaking tonight, that you fill out a speaker card. We have quite a few, and keep in mind that you'll have 3 minutes to speak, and I'm kind of a stickler on time just to keep it fair with everybody, so just keep that in mind. And if those of you who plan on speaking, the speaker cards are yellow and located at the back of the pews. We hope to get started really soon, so again, thank you for your patience. Again, thank you everyone for your patience. We're double checking some rules on how to proceed, but hang tight. All right, just in the nick of time. Good evening again, and welcome. The Town of Los Gatos Council meeting of October 15th, 2024 is now called to order. May we have a roll call?
Councilmember Isto?
Here.
Councilmember Ennie?
Here.
Councilmember Moore?
Here.
Vice Mayor Hudas?
Here.
Mayor Badami?
Here. Would Alexandra Ramban please come forward? Alexandra is our pledge leader for tonight, and I'm so delighted to let you all know some information about her. She's a senior at Los Gatos High School. Her favorite subjects are economics, history, government, and math. Her favorite activities are Model United Nations Theater, Linguistics and Phonetics Club, Math Club. She's also a math tutor, and she's a lifeguard. That's a lot of activities. Her community service is that she volunteers for the Veterans Memorial and Support Foundation and also the Monterey Turkish Arts and Culture Festival. So she's going to lead us off in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Let's have a round of applause for Alexandra. All right, the next order of business is our consent calendar. And items on the consent are considered routine town business and may be approved by one motion. A member of the council may request to have an item removed for comment and action, and members of the public may also speak and provide input on a consent item. So I will look to my council members. Councilmember Risto?
Thank you, Mayor. I would request that item 5 be removed from consent calendar due to the public input we've been receiving.
Okay, with that, item number 5 will be heard at the end of the evening, and that will be the last item after item number 11. So anyone that wants to provide comments on item number 5, I would ask that you hold them until we hear the item at the end of the evening. With that, I am going to look to my fellow council members if they have any other further comments. Otherwise, I'm going to open public comment. All right, public comment is open. Would anybody like to talk about any item on the consent item calendar? Anybody on Zoom with a hand raised?
There are no hands raised on Zoom.
Okay, I'm going to go back to my council members for a motion, a comment. Councilmember Risto?
Thank you. I move to approve the consent items 1 through 8 without, or 1 through 4 and 6 through 8.
Okay, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, Vice Mayor, second. I will have a roll call vote.
Councilmember Isto?
Aye.
Councilmember Ennie?
Aye.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Hudas?
Aye.
Mayor Badami?
Aye, passes unanimously. So now we're going to move on to verbal communications. And as I told you at the beginning of the meeting, that we have quite a few speaker cards, and usually we limit it to 30 minutes. So I would ask that we stay firm to the 3 minutes that we allow or less so that we can get through the evening. I have a lot of speaker cards, and I'm going to take them in order. And our first speaker is Gus Hu. Gus, please come forward.
left foot, right foot, feet, feet, feet. Oh, how many feet you mean? Okay, this is a picture of the Christmas truce in 1914. I'm trying to talk about soccer. In 1914, the World Cup, or not the World Cup, it's soccer. The World War I, there was a truce on Christmas Day, and I brought it up to art and the culture the other day. You really quick. That I was just thinking, like World War I, they used these as goalposts in the truce and stuff like that. I have a couple ideas. That would be one of my things. So I have some pictures of that. I'm not a really good public speaker.
Oh, yes, you are.
No. Okay, that's for the World Cup Soccer '94. We hosted it, and 2026 I did go around town and pass out flyers, and hopefully a couple people sent it in. And I just wanted to, I'm bummed I got a captain band on, and I'm not really good at this, so I was just trying to push that along. This will probably be my last time that I'm trying to push this, because there's a lot going on in my world. Let's see, what else do I want? Oh, yeah. Let's see. And there was 48 teams in the World Cup this year, because it's bigger than 32, or in 2026, and the 100th year is in from 1930 to 2030 is the 100th year World Cup, and so this will probably be our last World Cup. Okay, I got to do this real quick. Cuckoo! That's my impression of the Hunt for Red October, the movie, because Periscope. And that's last thing I wanted to remind everybody about is this is a comet going by, Nostradamus comet. This is the Nostradamus comet. We got pinged.
Gus, thank you so much for your comments. Our next speaker will be Lindley, followed by Rick R. or K. Welcome, Lindley.
Thank you. Good evening. As we consider who is worthy of our vote this November, I felt it important to discuss the qualities of a good leader. My notes are from Dr. David Jeremiah's Bible study book of 1 Timothy, the first letter written to Timothy in Ephesus by Paul, an apostle of Christ. Paul wrote this letter to Timothy to encourage him and others to be good leaders to the church at Ephesus. I would like to compare the church to our Los Gatos community and the church leaders to our elected officials. Paul reminded Timothy that we are saved not by good works, but by the blood of Christ, and yet we still must do good works. Paul urged Timothy to teach no other doctrine than that of the church. The purpose of this commandment is to love from a pure heart, from a good conscience, and from sincere faith. Paul told Timothy that the law is a good one if one uses it lawfully, knowing this, that the law is not made for a righteous person, but for the lawless and insubordinate, for the ungodly, sinners, the unholy and profane, murderers, fornicators, sodomites, kidnappers, liars, perjurers, and the sexually immoral, and if there is any other thing that is contrary to sound doctrine. So how do we wage the good warfare or fight the good fight? We fight with faith, a clear conscience, and for the benefit of others. Paul's most pressing concerns were that the leaders in Ephesus adhered to practices of godly living. By setting the bar high, Paul was helping Timothy minimize leadership problems. Leaders must be blameless, having one spouse, temperate, sober-minded, of good behavior, hospitable, able to teach, not given to wine, not violent, not greedy for money, but gentle, not quarrelsome, not sexually immoral, not covetous, one who rules his own house well, having his children in submission with all reverence. For if a man does not know how to rule his own house, how will he take care of the church or community? He should not be of a novice, lest being puffed up with pride, he fall into the same condemnation as the devil. Moreover, he must have good testimony among those who are outside, lest he fall into reproach and the snare of the devil. Let these leaders also first be tested. Let them serve, being found blameless. Likewise, their spouses must be reverent, not slanderers, temperate, faithful in all things. In later times, Paul wrote, people will depart from the faith, giving heed to deceiving spirits and doctrines of demons, speaking lies and hypocrisy, having their own conscience seared with a hot iron. Paul wanted Timothy to accuse a leader only when there were 2 or more witnesses, and to rebuke them in the presence of others, so as to discourage others from sinning. Godliness is profitable in all things, for we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we carry nothing out. For the love of money is the root of all evil. Keep God close to you so you can discern good works from bad ones. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is, if we could refrain from clapping or showing any signs of encouragement or disapproval, we need that as being important for the public discourse. Rick, welcome.
My name is Richard. My colleagues and I live in Santa Clara County. We are volunteers with United Sovereign Americans, not spokespersons. United Sovereign Americans, USA, is a nationwide organization with thousands of active volunteers in over 20 states. Today, we come to you as concerned citizens. Highly qualified data teams have spent hundreds of hours analyzing the official 2022 voter rolls provided by the California Secretary of State. The information they uncovered is alarming. The data team's analysis indicates that a massive number of voter registration records do not comply with the standards defined by the Constitution, as well as the federal and state laws. As such, the votes cast, counted, and certified in 2022 may not all have been accurate and compliant. We are not here to cast blame or aspersions on any elected official. We do not suggest that any candidates in any race have wrongly won or lost their races, nor do we advocate for the overturning or rerunning of any past elections. We're simply demanding an end to the inaccuracy and uncertainty plaguing our elections. Tonight, we will present to you and the public a resolution that contains a summary of those findings, along with the election standards that must be upheld as defined by federal election laws, case precedents established by the Supreme Court, and constitutional articles and amendments. Though you bear no direct responsibility for anything in the electoral process, we come to you, our closest elected representatives, for support and action. We're asking that you listen to the resolution, take the necessity for valid elections seriously, and add the resolution to your next meeting agenda for a vote. Our next 3 speakers will read the resolution in 3 parts, and our final speaker will conclude our presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. I have a question for the town attorney. In addition to being a stickler on time, I'm also a stickler on rules and regulations of the town. So when it comes to verbal communications, when we have speakers come forward, it is supposed to be on subject matter jurisdiction of the town council. Are we free to continue on this particular path of communication, Ms. Whelan?
Having not heard the resolution yet, it's hard to offer an opinion on whether it's related to town business or not. But my recommendation would be that the speakers make their request and then it be handled as it would to place any other item on a future town council agenda.
Okay, thank you. Next speaker is Jean R., followed by D.
Whoops. Hello, my name is Jean, and I am here to read into the record the first portion of the USA Resolution. Resolution for a legally valid 2024 general election. Whereas it is a recognized civil right in the United States for every citizen to have free and fair elections. Whereas it is the duty of our election officials to guarantee our elections are accurate and free from distortion or manipulation. Whereas our constitutional system of representative government only works when the following four tenets of an election are upheld. 1, the voter rolls must be accurate. National Voter Registration Act, 1993. 2, votes counted must be from eligible voters. U.S. Constitution, 14th Amendment, Section 2. 3, the number of votes counted must equal the number of voters who voted. 4, there can be no more than 1 in 125,000 ballots in error by the voting system. Help America Vote Act, 2002. Whereas the analysis of the California 2022 general election has uncovered evidence of massive inaccuracies that appear to violate both federal and state laws, including 5,886,198 ineligible or uncertain registration violations found within the California State Voter Roll Database, 2,776,939 votes cast by ineligible or uncertain registrations, 123,785 more votes counted than voters who voted. No one knows who cast them. 2,776,849 apparent voting violations in excess of the legal standard of system accuracy for a valid federal election. Maximum allowable system errors for the 22 general election was 90. Certification, as defined by law, is an attestation of accuracy and compliance. The certification of the 2022 election appears to have been fraudulent and illegal. Thank you.
Thank you, Jean. All right, Dee, please come forward.
Good evening. My name is Dee, and I'm here to read into record the next section of the USA Resolution. Whereas these findings trample legal accuracy requirements of the voting system during the federal election. Whereas the intent of the voters must be known factually before certification can be lawfully conducted. Whereas the 2022 general election appears to have been invalid, depriving us of the guaranteed protection of our natural rights under the government duly and provably chosen by us, the American people, resulting in incalculable damage to our families, our way of life, and the fabric of these United States. Therefore, we call upon our representatives to provide relief to the people and the assurance of domestic tranquility by joining us in demanding a valid 2024 general election that upholds these existing laws and equitable principles of law. Proof of citizenship, identity, and eligibility required to register and vote, not anonymous attestation. Voter rolls certified accurate and available for public review. Challenged 30 days before the start of early voting. Voters added after that date must bring proof of citizenship, identity, and address in person to a qualified official at each polling place. Hand-marked secure ballots, similar to currency, where imaging technology is used for tabulation. The security features must be verifiable in the ballot image. Systems, machines, security measures, infrastructure, and conduct are required to be compliant with federal law for fraud prevention regarding risk assessment, certification, testing, and implementation. Thank you.
Thank you, Dee. Next speaker is Alicia Schoolcraft, followed by Teresa.
Good evening. My name is Alicia, and I'm here to read into the record the last section of the USA Resolution. Number 5, adjudication must be signed off by party, candidate, and trained citizen witness after being given full and effective observation rights. Candidates and trained citizens must be allowed immediate access to the ballots, ballot images, and cast vote records. Number 6, ballots regardless of entry source, election operations and systems must maintain end-to-end chain of custody from voter to vote count to final canvass, including auditability and witness transfer with paper records. Number 7, a National Institute of Standards and Technology compliant, randomized, statistically valid end-to-end audit with a 95% confidence level of all elections pursuant to the 14th Amendment, Section 2 must be performed. These audits are to be conducted by qualified, insured, and bonded security forensics or financial auditors, not personnel from within the election system. Reconciliation will include the vote count, real physical ballots, adjudication, cast vote records, ballot count, qualified voter count, custody transfer, and all other paper and electronic election systems, including logs. Number 8, if the total of unique variances above is more than 10% of the margin of victory, a new election must be held in the state for those candidates affected, unless the issues can be provably corrected by a manual hand recount and a full review of records. Number 9, waiver of requirements is not allowed. Only end-to-end system compliance from registration through certification can guarantee the intent of the people is accurately recorded. Be it resolved that the Los Gatos Town Council members stand in support with the concerns and remedies presented here. We implore the Santa Clara Board of Supervisors, California Legislature, federal legislatures, law enforcement, federal and state prosecutors, judges, and both California Secretary of State and county registrars of voters to cooperate and fulfill firm requests of the people. Thank you.
Thank you, Alicia. Our next speaker is Teresa, followed by Sue.
Good evening. My name is Teresa, and I'm here to conclude our presentation. What you heard tonight is a powerfully written resolution outlining massive inaccuracies in our 2022 election, from registration through certification. The resolution delineates meaningful remedies that will proactively protect the validity of the 2024 general election for all Americans. Your written copy cites many U.S. Supreme Court precedents and federal and constitutional mandates that support the need for such actions. Large numbers of Californians have questions about the trustworthiness of our elections. Official data show these concerns are valid, and the law says resolving them is essential in securing our liberty. The cost for not fixing the enumerated problems is immeasurable, so we urge you to put this resolution on the agenda for the next City Council meeting, where you can vote to join us in support of fair, honest, and valid elections. The United Sovereign Americans website showcases our initiatives nationwide and features some extremely informative election videos. We encourage you to visit uniteforfreedom.com and learn more about our organization and our goal to restore valid elections throughout our country. That's unite4freedom.com. One more time, unite4freedom.com. Thank you very much for your time tonight.
Thank you, Teresa. Next speaker is Sue, followed by Linda Swinberg.
Good evening. Thank you for letting us speak tonight. My name is Sue, and I'm also a volunteer for United Sovereign Americans. Federal law outlines strict standards that must be followed in a federal election. This is a federal election, starting with the specific requirements for valid voter registrations. We shared that in the 2022 general election, there were over 5.8 million ineligible or uncertain registrations on the California state voter roll, and of those, over 2.7 million voted in that election. These are records that are facially invalid as defined by law. Things such as invalid birth dates, incomplete or invalid addresses or names, duplicate registrations, people who could be certified with death certificates, etc. There are many places for a person to register to vote, but the election officials must confirm that those registrations are valid. You also heard that almost 124,000 more votes were counted than voters who voted. This needs to be investigated. The number of votes counted and the number of voters who voted should always be the same. And we also shared that there were almost 2.8 million apparent voting violations that exceeded the 90 ballots in error that California was allowed per federal law. The allowable errors are based on the number of ballots cast in that election. It's 1 out of 125,000 ballots, which gave us 90. In California, every active person on our voter rolls gets mailed a ballot, and ballot harvesting, that is turning in ballots for others, is legal. How can we tolerate having almost 6 million ballots mailed out to questionable registrants? Our voter rolls must contain only legitimate registrations. Otherwise, how can we ever trust in the integrity of our elections? The resolution also outlined meaningful remedies to protect the validity of the upcoming election for all Americans. Federal laws and principles of law already define those remedies. USA is just demanding that our election officials follow the law. The last page of your resolution cites those many federal statutes and standards, and you also have copies of the 3 most recent press releases for lawsuits that they have filed. There's been a total of 9 so far. Many Californians question the trustworthiness of our elections. Though you bear no direct responsibility for anything in the electoral process, we come to you, our closest elected representatives, for support and action. You, the residents of Los Gatos, Santa Clara County, California, and the U.S. are all impacted if ineligible people vote. This is not a partisan issue. It is a civil rights violation if an eligible citizen voter has their vote diluted by someone ineligible to vote. Once a ballot is removed from the envelope, there is no way to determine that that ballot was cast by an ineligible or questionable registrant. That is why it's an imperative that our voter rolls contain only legitimate registrations. We urge you to put this resolution on your agenda for your next city council meeting. At that time, you can vote to join us in supporting fair, honest, and valid elections. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue. Linda Swinberg. Yes, I'm a stickler on rules.
Hi, everyone. I know you've probably heard me talk about this before, but this is kind of new. I recently attended a Complete Streets and Transportation Commission meeting, and I wanted to talk to you about some things that happened there. First of all, I went there to bring to their attention the issues we are having with congestion on Blossom Hill Road since last year's traffic calming project. I don't understand how we can get some attention on this matter. There should be some assessment as to whether this project does what it set out to do and whether the results are worth the congestion resulting from the changes. You know from surveys that you had done that the congestion in our town is one of the top concerns of the residents of our town. You also know that congestion is the top concern that this town council has any power over. It should be priority, okay? Now, I sent a message to, I think, the town manager asking how I could get this taken up, and I was redirected back to the Complete Streets and Transportation Commission. That's how I wound up there. But the problem is, I'm not even sure that the commissioners in that room are knowledgeable enough to serve on that body. And I'll tell you why. After I was done with my comments, one of the commissioners asked me some questions, which, I'm glad to take, but he asked me to tell him more about the traffic on Blossom Hill. He wanted to know what's creating it, where it could be coming from, or whatever. And he qualified his question by saying something like he was unfamiliar with that street and that area of town. I was actually speechless. I did not expect that. Blossom Hill Road is a main artery in and out of our town. Anyone tasked with advising this council here about projects that involve all of the modes of travel in our town should be familiar with the main routes in and out of it. That's it.
Any questions for the speaker? See none, thank you. I would just like to remind council and our town manager that traffic calming is one of our strategic priorities. We will have a further discussion on this. Thank you, Linda. Next speaker is Brian Bertaccini, followed by Dennis Jameson.
Thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. As a former Army Ranger, I know a thing or two about selfless service and to serve a purpose greater than yourself. And I believe we share that common ground. On that note, I have served as an election observer in Santa Clara County since I retired from industry in 2021. Like you, my public service has resulted in personal attacks. You might hear from some partisan activists labeling myself and my colleagues as engaging in voter suppression, discrimination, and threatening behavior towards election officials, all without merit or without a shred of evidence. These people are using defamatory and false information to harm our cause. During my time as an election observer, I've witnessed a number of violations with the California Elections Code, the California Code of Regulations, and the voting system use procedures. These violations include election workers sharing usernames and passwords to access the voting systems, eliminating a valid audit trail. They're using unauthorized equipment to program our voting systems, and they've enabled wireless communications on our ballot printing devices. I've attempted to address these issues with our Board of Supervisors, County Board of Supervisors, Secretary of State, and a Santa Clara County Civil Grand Jury. I provided evidence via a jurat affidavit under the penalty of perjury. After being ignored by county and state officials, I filed a lawsuit with Santa Clara County, requesting a writ of mandate compelling the board compelling the Register of Voters to follow state statute, regulation, and use procedures. During our hearing, the county admitted being technically non-compliant and asked for the case to be dismissed because the legal remedy that I was asking for was a writ of mandate. The judge in her order said that that was not the proper judicial remedy, and the proper remedy would have been to decertify the election. That was not the remedy that we were seeking. It would have been a huge problem for the county. My point is there are real issues that need to be addressed, and that's why we are here. And we want to be able to trust our voting systems and our election processes, and we appreciate your consideration in supporting this effort. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, Dennis, and then we'll have Joe Enns. And after that, just as a heads up, I have 2 speaker cards after Joe speaks.
Mayor, City Council. My name is Dennis Jameson. I'm a representative of the Election Integrity Project California, which has been around since 2010, long before the infamous 2020 election. In that period of time, Election Integrity has sent 20,000 observers out to observe and to basically record what they saw in relation to following the law. Seeing the law violated, we wrote up incident reports, and basically we have 20,000 affidavits of the violations of the law. The unfortunate reality is, even though we've taken this information before the court system doesn't seem to want to deal with these pieces of evidence, which are valid evidence basically by citizen observers, which we have the right to do. We are a nonpartisan organization, and it's kind of hard to believe that we're nonpartisan in such a highly toxic political environment that we have right now. But what we are trying to do is get back to obeying the law. The essence is that the law may be on the books, but what we've observed is that it doesn't matter whether it's on the books or not. Just like you have a speed limit sign on the highway and people just go 80 in a 65-mile zone. The only problem is that we've noticed that it's the leaders who create the laws and the ones who are running the operations of the elections who are violating the laws. And if you have a situation of entrenchment, that means that they don't want to pay attention to the law. Why would they pay attention to the citizens who are calling attention to the violation of the law? It is a situation in which I know that you asked the question about whether this is outside your jurisdiction. Maybe not business as usual. But we don't believe it's business as usual either. We don't believe that the people that we pay their salaries are doing their jobs. Either they're doing the job to obey the law, or they're doing the job to avoid the things that they should be doing. And this is a real concern. And it's about that simple. It's not a complicated situation. So we're here to support USA. We understand that USA has come to some of the same conclusions that EIPCA has come in the past 10 years. And the reality of that is that it is not a good picture, because we see that the voter rolls are a mess in the state of California. And all we're asking is that the people who are supposed to attend the voter rolls do that job, make sure that the voter rolls are accurate and they're valid. So we advise the council to take it up on a town agenda in the future, hopefully the next one, because the election is just down the road. We support USA in this effort, and we hope that you can also do the same. Thank you.
Thank you, Dennis. Joe Enns.
Joe Enns, community organizer, Friends of Lost Gatos Creek, friends of our wonderful police department over there, Mr. Tata and Jamie. Councilmember Stowe, thanks for working on getting a bathroom. I love this town, you know, and I've read the thing in the paper about how much trouble it's been for so long. And I watch tourists all the time, that plastic head over there. But thank you for that. And I wrote things down so I could be my ADHD aside and not be all over the place. We got a new town manager. I don't believe they're here. I don't like being negative, but when things have to change, and I'm glad there's people here who care
Joe,
about
please address the council.
I'm sorry. I'm pointing that way to the people that we're here to talk about the law, and that's I'm kind of a stickler like you are for rules, so thank you for keeping me safe. Okay. One of them has to do with the library and gang stalking. I didn't know what that was. It's when people get together and don't like you, and they network, and they make you look bad. I've had a loud voice, so I've created some disturbances there and there, but I've got some people that don't like me as well and are targeting me. One of them burned their house down. There's some nasty people. And somebody's got, you can't count on the police to investigate every little thing, and I'm trying to help as much as I can, the police, with some of these scofflaws that are majorly bad, and we're understaffed at the police department. I'm doing the best I can. We've got a new captain. Can I look over there? I've heard about. Good. And I really want to put it out there to our river people on the creek that are with the police department, to these service people. I can't even remember his name. Anyway, he told me something that's, around the police department, that I was being gang stalked at the library, and so I caught a second 3-month charge, and the cops were telling me this. I didn't even do anything. There's people that are setting you up, and there's a camera out there. And the other day, it was PG&E, I was in a discussion with somebody, and there's people out there that will start an argument with you in public to get you to look like you're disturbing the peace. So I caught a 3-day suspension. I took it, or a 2-month suspension, talked to Ryan, everything's cool. Ryan's a great guy, but he has no control over his people. And there's a 36 seconds, there's a Chinese woman over that hates me for the little white dog I bought and didn't like me, and she's twice trying to throw me out. She's a second behind this, getting people together to not like me. First time one of the employees pushed me, he could have got a disciplinary action. I'm next union president, City of Santa Cruz. Ryan didn't do it, and Ryan's just listening to this lady, this little Chinese lady who hates me, getting people together, and I just got a 3-month suspension now from the library that is not. I'm sending it in a grand jury, but it's going to the town manager and city attorney, like when I got rid of Tessina, your police chief. I'm the one who got rid of him. So I'm done. Thanks.
Joe, thank you. So we've reached our 30-minute time limit, but I only have 2 cards remaining, so it's my prerogative to extend the time to allow all our speakers to speak tonight without waiting till the end of the evening. So our next 2 cards, Rich Stevens, followed by Karen Yamamoto. Rich, please come forward.
I'll be quick. My name's Rich Stevens, and I apologize that you all know me so well. I really appreciate everything you've done, hearing my concerns, et cetera. Thank you for everything you do, and I hope that your support of our town continues. Again, thank you.
Thank you, Rich. Karen Yamamoto.
Hi, I'm Karen Yamamoto. Again, I'm sorry. You've seen me too much too. I was going through the website and you have an error on it as far as the map goes with shoot. Oh, Ace Hardware. Got it. The Ace Hardware build, which is supposedly, I'm putting together a book. Anyhow, your map on here has the Ace Hardware coming up as the post office, as Santa Cruz Avenue. I just want you guys to know that it needs to be rectified and that building needs to be there so I can get the information. Okay, thank you.
Before you go away, I noticed I have another speaker card for agenda item number 7, which
Oh,
was on
yeah.
consent, but we've already passed consent, so I just wanted to point that out.
Yeah, I noticed. I tried to jump up and you were already voting and that was that. And
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Do we have any virtual hands on Zoom that wish to speak during verbal communications?
There are no hands raised on Zoom.
All right. Would anybody else like to come forward with a speaker card before I close verbal communications? See no one come forward. I'm going to close verbal communications, and we're going to move to our other business, which is item number 9. Item number 9 having to do with a license agreement with Flock Safety. Welcome, Ms. Burnham.
Good evening, Nicole Burnham, Director of Parks and Public Works. Just a brief introduction to this item. As I think many of you know, Parks and Public Works has authority over the town's right-of-ways and public spaces. We generally, for temporary encroachments into those right-of-ways, for utility work, we issue an encroachment permit. For longer-term or permanent impacts to the right-of-way, we issue a license agreement. It came to our attention that Flock, at the request of 7 different residents throughout town, installed cameras within the public right-of-way, so this license agreement is intended to address that long-term placement of infrastructure within the town right-of-way. And with that, I can open it up for questions.
Okay. Thank you. All right, looking to my council members to see if we have any questions, comments. See none. Vice Mayor.
So I had a question, and reading the staff report on page 2, it says that if the license agreement is not executed, the cameras would need to be removed at the expense of the property owner, paid for installation, and it also refers to the data that's coming from these. And so my question is, if they're in the public right-of-way, should we or can we require that the data be shared with our law enforcement folks?
Yeah, I'm going to defer to our police chief to answer that question.
Good evening, Jamie Field, Chief for the Police Department. Thank you for the question. Related to the functionality of the system, so right now this is about the encroachment permits for these devices to be on town property. So it seems, and I would look to the town attorney for guidance on this, that we could set some parameters around the requirements of allowing that encroachment permit and the agreement that would occur. But in terms of the functionality, those can be privately purchased, and it's up to the individual to allow for that information to be shared to the police department. I hope that helps with the question.
So the agreement that is in the packet is between the town and Flock. And what I'd like to propose is that the council authorize staff to meet with Flock to ask for an addition to section 1, which is talking about what Flock is providing to the town in exchange for the benefit of the use of public right-of-way. And so staff would be proposing that the following sentence be added to section 1, which would say, In addition, licensee agrees to share any data obtained from the cameras with the Los Gatos Montessorino Police Department.
And I would just add, in our negotiations with Flock, that if that is what council asks us to do, the language may or may not be exactly that way, but if the town council authorizes the town manager to negotiate and execute such an agreement, that can be done without having to return to you.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, so if I could just follow up. I asked both whether we legally can require that, but the other question was, should we require that? Does it make sense? I don't know the history of how these cameras came about. I don't know what kind of data is contained on these cameras. Is it something that if it is in the public right of way, should the town have access to that information?
I can start and then I'll have our police department chime in. I do believe that, as license plate readers, it is to read license plates, so there may be other information, but that is largely something that is used by law enforcement agencies, and that's typically, if someone's going to spend the money to invest in these devices, that's usually the end use or the end purpose is to support law enforcement activities. And I think that's why originally we weren't anticipating that as being a need to ask for it, because it seemed to be almost implied of why would you get such a device if that was not your end intention. But there's no harm in trying to make sure that that's very clear in the agreement. And I'll let our police department chime in if they would like to.
Good evening, Clinton Tata, Support Services Captain. So just as the town manager mentioned, that is exactly the intent of the license plate reader cameras. Any private purchase that residents or community members do make on their own for the system is with the intent that they want to assist local law enforcement, which would mean include sharing that data that is CGIS compliant data that gets notifications to the police department in relation to crimes or criminal activity and or vehicles that are wanted or stolen through the California DMV system. So essentially what occurs is that these cameras, if somebody buys them or purchases them on their own, and they decide that they do not want to share that information with local law enforcement, then essentially what they're buying is a surveillance camera, license plate camera that takes photographs, which doesn't have the functionality of integrating with local law enforcement or allowing the police department to be notified if there are any vehicles that are associated to a crime.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Rennie.
Thank you, Mayor. I think there's another question also. We have pretty specific data retention rules to protect the privacy of people for the cameras we control. Cameras on private property, I guess we can't control that, but we were talking about if you want to use our public property, maybe we should think about adding something in there that relates to data retention so that the neighbors can't be spying on each other for months at a time or something like that, and we're complicit in that by them using our public property. So maybe that's a question for the town attorney. Does she have thoughts on that issue?
Once the town accesses the data, you're correct, it does become a public record, and then it does become subject to the town's retention schedule. For the town's own video cameras, there's state law that dictates how long we keep that video. And if memory serves, don't quote me, it's something akin to 90 days. This data would be a little bit different because it would be obtained from private cameras. And so it's my initial opinion that it would be subject to the general 2-year retention period that the town has in its retention schedule when a more specific rule doesn't apply. So if the town were to request the data and receive it, the town would be keeping that for 2 years, and it would be subject to Public Records Act requests. There are various exemptions to the State Public Records Act, and there is an exemption for when privacy interests outweigh the public interest in the release of the information. Cities don't typically win that argument, and so it is likely that the data would be provided as a public record.
Okay. Any further questions from council members before I open public comment? Seeing none, I'm going to open public comment. Fred Faltersack, please come forward. Welcome, Fred.
Good evening, and thank you for listening to me today. First of all, I want to apologize for whatever problems have been caused by my role in coordinating with Harwood neighbors to pay over $10,000 out of our pockets to provide the Los Gatos Montesino Police Department with 2 license plate reader cameras on Harwood Road. They were installed with the intent to partner with our police by providing tools to help them to keep their community safe from criminal activity. Prior to the LPRs being installed, our neighborhood experienced 3 reported break-ins over previous 2 years. In the 19 months since the installation, there's been 0 reported break-ins. In the past 30 days, the 2 Harwood LPRs have read just under 500,000 license plates, and our police have searched the system 185 times. Hopefully, this would indicate that our detectives are working for the purpose of gathering evidence of a crime. I, of course, can only assume this as private citizens. We are not privy to the criminal passage through the LPRs and or the apprehension of the bad people. The license agreement before the council tonight is not a bad thing, but it may need to be thought out a bit more before approval. I'm not an attorney, but what I'm reading makes it seem as though a further financial investment in public safety by the Los Gatos residents would not be such a good idea. An investment which costs thousands of dollars per year would be able to be removed 30 days after the town sends a written notice to Flock to remove the LPRs. In conclusion, as this agreement is currently drafted, I can't go back to my 30 neighbors who helped fund the Harwood LPRs and ask for more money. I do believe the town should allow future encroachment permits in the public right-of-way for citizens' paid Flock installations, provided our police approve the installation, have unlimited access to the LPRs, and obtain the approval from the property owner where the unit is to be installed. Those of you that know me understand that this was all in the name of public safety. Before Flock, we had only neighborhood watch, but that requires watchful eyes and a quick call to our safety officers in the town. That's all I have, and be glad to answer any questions.
Any questions, Vice Mayor?
Yeah, thank you very much. And I'm a big supporter of Flock. I think it's a way of helping to make our community safer without resorting to things like profiling and other techniques, because this is very specific. The Flock only flags criminals, and it directs our police efforts in a very precise way, and so I think it's a good thing. The comments that you've provided tonight seem to support the idea of having the data that's provided by these privately owned Flock cameras, having that data provided to the police and to public safety. It sounds like that was the intention, correct?
That is correct. The only reason that I pitched it to my neighborhood was that the police would have immediate access to all the officers on duty and to their dispatch the moment a license plate went through that LPR and came up as a flagged stolen car, bad person, whatever.
Great. So I think I think you may have some additional information tonight. Would you be willing to provide that in writing to our town staff?
I mean, with me right in front of me?
Yeah, in the future, not necessarily.
I would be glad to provide what knowledge I've gained over the last 19 months of having the flock in our neighborhood. It would have taken way more than 3 minutes, and so whatever participation or is requested of me, I shall assist.
Thank you very much.
Okay, any further questions? Councilmember Isto.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Faltersack. I think a lot of this came up. I guess the question I have for you is, when you and your neighbors installed the flock cameras, was your intention to put it in the public right-of-way, or was it specifically to put it up and then share the data?
The intention was to put it in the public right-of-way. From what I understood, that's where they went and asked that permission of the town. Flock did. They obtained the permission to put it in the public right-of-way. You know, unfortunately, the public right-of-way is also somebody's private land. Yeah, that 5 feet of public right-of-way off the sidewalk or whatever it may be. And unfortunately, it was not able, the one neighbor that was not happy with the one camera, I didn't get to him until after he showed his displeasure for it. And I reworked with Flock again to see if it could be relocated. The neighbor even gave me another spot he could put it on in the public right-of-way, a little more where he would prefer it, and Flock said it wouldn't cover the same thing. So you know, and my notes even on the neighbor, I don't know if he's here today, but after I met with him, I said, you know, these are my notes I put in my phone. Met Tom today on installation of flock system on Harwood. He was mad that I did not make prior contact. He's actually a great guy. We have lots in common. He's owned the house for 51 years. It's his parents' home, you know, and I can go on and on about how much we had in common, but I got off on the wrong foot with him. I don't know where that stands now, but that's why in my presentation today I said that, added that it should be allowed in public right-of-way, but it also needs the blessing of the neighbor that's going to have it on his property. So,
did that answer your question?
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Mr. Faltersack. No further questions. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, do we have any virtual hands on Zoom that wish to speak on this item?
There are no hands on Zoom.
I have no speaker card, so I'm going to close public comment. Go back to my council members for comments. A motion. Councilmember Risto.
Thank you, and I appreciate the staff report. I also appreciate the fact that you know, it's been about a year working through this, because a year ago it, you know, came to be known that there were some privately installed flock cameras on the public right-of-way. And so I appreciate that we've come to a way to keep this valuable tool, you know, working for the police department. One question I have is, I saw we have an outline of all of the cameras that are in the public right-of-way. Are all of them sharing information with our police department?
Clinton Tata again. It's my understanding that all of the cameras that are in the public right-of-way are definitely sharing information through Flock ALPR through to the police department currently.
Okay, thank you. Because, I mean, one of the things was, unlike people having cameras on their homes where they're keeping an eye on their own property and they have the opportunity to opt into the police program, where if there is an incident on that street and police say, you know, hey, do you see anything between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. and the homeowner has the option, the flock cameras are constantly working, and the entire point of them is license plate reading. So it's hard for me to imagine anyone installing one for any other reason except to extend the network of the observation we have at our gateways. As I was looking through the proposed agreement, or how we can move forward, I was curious about why we would have a 5-year limit on how long any of the cameras in the public right-of-way can be. If they prove to be valuable, would the goal be that at the end of 5 years they have to move 5 feet over, or how is 5 years chosen, and is there an option to extend that if that becomes something that the neighborhood wants to continue to pay for and we find is an important location for us?
Yeah, I can take that question. Yes, I think there would be an opportunity to extend. I think the nature of the way they're built, you know, and we also wanted to make sure that if they stopped getting paid for, they got removed. But generally speaking, I mean, if they're there, you know, we would work with Flock to extend the agreement or, you know, do what we needed to do to negotiate as long as they're still in use. But
Okay,
once they're no longer in use, we do want them removed.
Okay, and then continuing, the other things I was thinking about is some of this came about because Flock, the company, was not aware of who could authorize a camera going into the public right-of-way. So now it seems like that's been straightened out. So if a group of residents want to have a camera installed, it will be on private property. I think the other thing that came out of this one particular situation on Harwood is the public right-of-way was somewhat unknown, that it was irregular. And as the residents asked questions about, well, can it be here, can it be there, it was a little hopscotch. So I'm curious to know, with future installations, because it seems like we're making it clear that future installations will only be on private property, do we have a good way to help a neighborhood or a homeowner understand where is a reasonable place to put it, so that they can, you know, work with their neighbors, get it in the right place, and have it actually be useful? So it's not behind a shrubbery or, you know, not able to observe an intersection.
We do. We the right of way is when people request that support. There are also additional Flock cameras that actually did end up on private property, so they're not the subject of this agreement. But similar, you know, there's another 4 or 5 of them that are also in town, and so we can help with that.
Great. Okay, it sounds like the loose ends have gotten wrangled. I appreciate that.
Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mayor. So first, I really appreciate Mr. Falterzak's comments. I think that's really helpful. And I'm trying to reconcile his comments with the last paragraph in the discussion part of the staff report, which talks about the chief being able to approve future Flock installations, which I think seems very good. I think that makes a lot of sense to make sure that our chief has oversight over this, and also has some discretion with the encroachment permits. But the last part of that says no future installations for Flock cameras for private use will be allowed. That also seems good, but I'm trying to understand whether or not that prevents someone like Mr. Falterzak from talking to his neighbors about, purchasing and paying for Flock cameras for, public use, but, in their neighborhood.
I think it does, but I think that's where Parks and Public Works would need to come and work with the interested community members and see if we could work with them and Flock and the police department to see if we could find a location on private property for the installation. And to be clear, when our police department requests new installation, we work with them and we support that installation and we coordinate location, and that can be in the right of way. We make the distinction of when something is privately funded.
Okay, got it. So, and so just to clarify, so if someone in a neighborhood says, I want my neighborhood to have one of these, I'm willing to fund it, then PPW and the police department would work with that person to identify a public location to install the camera?
I think we'd work with them to try to find a private location. That would be our preference.
Okay, got it. Okay, so it sounds like, and not to at all put words in anyone's mouths, but it sounds like those concerns would be mitigated through, kind of what we're talking about here. That those wouldn't necessarily, you could still talk with your neighbors and install and get a camera installed, so long as it's not for individual use.
That's what I believe what we're saying. Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you. That's very helpful.
Okay, any further questions or comments from council members or a motion? Vice Mayor.
I think there are really great benefits of the Flock system, but we have to also recognize that the by the fact that these cameras are in the public right-of-way, we now get into an issue about potential privacy and data retention responsibilities. So I think it would be, even though we know that the current ones are being shared with our law enforcement, property owners change, people move, cameras stay. And so I think it would be a good idea that if these cameras are in the public right-of-way, then we should require that the data be shared. And then because it's being shared, automatically the data retention policies that we have will kick in. And so we won't have a situation where a privately owned camera that's in the public right-of-way is running afoul of privacy and other concerns. So, for that reason, I think it would be a good idea to require that flock cameras that are in the public right-of-way should have their data shared.
Okay, town manager.
Katie Nomura, interim town manager. Just if I can clarify, and the town attorney can chime in if I'm misstating, but I just want to kind of clarify something, though, that just because they are in the public right-of-way does not make them town property. They are still the property of that individual and of flock. And so it would be the data that PD then accesses. That information and those records are under PRA and could be accessible, and that is where the retention and all of that comes into play. It's my understanding that from the private perspective, Flock retains the images for 30 days, but it's only when it becomes a town record that we would start retaining.
Thank you for that clarification. And I think that the language that the town attorney suggested before is something we should explore.
Councilmember Isto.
Thank you. So just to clarify, the retention of the information, once the police have it, it doesn't matter which camera it came from. The retention time is the same. Okay, with that and with the language proposed by the town attorney, the addition, I'm ready to make a motion unless there's other comments. So I move to authorize the town manager to execute a license agreement with Flock Safety to retain privately funded cameras installed in the town of Los Gatos right-of-way in attachment 1, and with the addition of the wording from the town attorney about the requirement to share,
I would just, if possible, if you could authorize the town manager to negotiate and execute such an agreement with the added specification that data will be shared with the town. That way we have some flexibility in how exactly it gets done.
Yes, so I'll correct my motion to say not just execute, but negotiate and execute the license agreement, and add the condition that all data gathered from any cameras on the public right-of-way be shared with the town and with the police department.
That's perfect, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I have a motion. Looking for a second. Do I have a second? Vice Mayor.
Second.
Okay, let's have a roll call vote, if you will, Ms. Wood.
Councilmember Isto?
Aye.
Councilmember Rennie?
Aye.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Hudas?
Aye.
Mayor Badami?
Aye. Passes unanimously. All right, now we move on to item number 10, which is on REACH code modifications. Welcome, Mr. Gray.
Good evening, Mayor. Good evening, Vice Mayor, council members. Robert Gray, Chief Building Official. Before you tonight is a discussion item to provide direction to staff on potential REACH code modifications. As you probably recall, every 3 years, the state of California requires jurisdictions to adopt updated building codes. And in November of 2022, the council adopted these updated codes as required and added additional compliance measures known as REACH codes to help combat greenhouse gas emissions. These REACH codes mandate that all new construction within the town must include all electric construction as well as increased electric vehicle charging requirements. In the Bay Area, most jurisdictions are exploring alternative REACH code requirements to promote energy efficiency and reduce greenhouse gas emissions. We're here tonight to discuss that possible modification for our REACH codes. We have a slideshow that a couple of presentations that just give a really high-level overview of where we're at. This table summarizes the difference between what we'll call the base state codes and the town's adopted REACH codes that go over and above the state code. In the appliances on the left column, water heater, space heating, which is furnaces, any type of central heating systems, cooking, outdoor appliances, specialized industrial processes, and restaurant and tenant improvement situations we see. All of those items in the state code, in the base state code, has the option of providing gas or electric, either one. The caveat to that is if a gas outlet is installed in any of those locations, an electrical circuit is required to be installed as well for future conversion of those appliances should a new owner or someone else want to convert that particular location. Our Los Gatos REACH codes went over and above the state REACH code or a state code and required electrical for all of those locations without the possibility of gas, with the exception of tenant improvements, any new restaurant associated with a new build. They could ask for an exemption for those items. Next slide. Next slide. Next. There we go. This is just kind of a summary of what is outlined out in greater detail within the staff report. So option number one is to repeal portions of the existing REACH code and allow natural gas in new buildings and major remodels. This also has the caveat of, again, requiring if someone wanted to use a gas outlet in those locations, they would also have to include electrical circuits in those locations for the appliances that we discussed earlier. The pros of this option is it avoids litigation based on federal law and preemption. The cons, obviously, allows for continued use of natural gas and can obviously continue contributing to greenhouse gas emissions, poor air quality. Option number two would be to repeal portions of the existing REACH code and replace it with an alternative REACH code using energy performance standards. Again, this does still require, if a gas outlet is chosen to be installed, you still would have to include the electrical outlets as well for those specific appliances. The pros of this option uses established processes through the Title 24 of California Building Standards Code, just like adopting any other code within the state. It's a legally sound, only increases compliance margin, just basically requires a higher level of energy compliance on not all of the appliances installed at a home, but just a couple of them. But it still does require the dual, what we call the dual plumbed option of gas and electric in those locations. The cons of this requires a cost-effective study and California Energy Commission approval, which is quite lengthy and time-consuming. Requires additional resources, adds complexity during implementation, adds quite a bit of some different layers of review and plan review as well as inspection. Option number three, there we go. Repeal portions of the existing REACH code and set a 0 NOx or nitrous oxide emitting appliance threshold that regulates air quality. It is it's comprehensive and can cover any appliances that use gas and emit the NOx gas. Simple to enforce, conforms with the upcoming Bay Area Air Quality Management District regulations going into effect in a couple of years. It does not require a cost effectiveness study or California Energy Commission approval. The major con to this, it has not been legally tested at this point. So this is kind of a high-level overview of what's in the staff report. That's the conclusion of our staff report, and we're here to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gray. Questions for Mr. Gray? Councilmember Moore, followed by Councilmember Rennie.
Thank you very much, Mayor. I really appreciate you all bringing this forward to us. I know this has been a complicated issue. I really appreciate the creativeness we're trying to employ here. I think this is a question for the town attorney. So on the major con of option 3 of the untested legality issue is the consequence of what are the potential consequences? Would it end up going through the same process that the original ordinance went through, where a city's ordinance was challenged, or how would that work?
What I anticipate is a similar advocacy group, such as the Restaurant Association, might contact the town and say, we think that the ordinance is also preempted by the Federal Energy Preservation Act. And if that were to occur, then the town would evaluate it at that point in time. With ordinances such as this, the town always retains the ability to rescind it and replace it with something else. So it's not set in stone. Does that answer your question?
Okay. Yes, absolutely. That's very helpful. And then the only other part of that is, what is our, are we leaning into this air quality portion of this newly to sort of separate from our original ordinance?
I think it's an alternative way to reduce the emissions that natural gas appliances cause. So it's just another way of looking at the same problem. And then one thing we wanted to mention is, cities have gone different ways on this. The city of Campbell and Los Altos Hills have recently adopted ordinances that prohibit the NOx emissions. And then Cupertino has opted to go with the more extensive energy performance method that entails review by the state. And it entails more staff review of applications when they come into the city.
Thank you.
Councilmember Rennie?
Thank you, Mayor. So my question is on option 2. In your box on the right, it said that it didn't include stoves and heaters and pools and so forth. I was under the impression that we could create some kind of total house energy efficiency and let the people designing their house or decide how much, where to place their efficiencies. And so I sort of had this picture that we could do something that included all of those, and again, let them choose where to get the energy efficiency points. Is something like that possible?
Yes, thank you for the question. You're exactly right. That is kind of the base model of how the Energy Performance Code would work, or that particular option would work. The Energy Code in that particular situation is only going to address space heating and water heating. It's not going to address the other items like cooktops and dryers and various things like that. It still does fall back to the base code of requiring dual plumbed for those other items that we talked about earlier. But those two appliances are the two appliances, heating and water heating. Those are the only two that come into play with the increased efficiency numbers, the margin of efficiency. So you can pick and choose from a menu basically to increase efficiency in one area as a trade-off of having less efficient gas appliance somewhere else. But the only two that really adds to the higher efficiency level are those two single appliances. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. So going back, so then on option number 3, with the NOx emissions, we would be able to do something for stoves on NOx, like emissions, like, because that's an indoor health issue that would, in some ways, I think is sort of more urgent to, a lot of people don't realize the emissions that gas stoves put out in their homes and how that can affect their kids that are growing up and so forth. And it seems like we want to address or at least make people more aware that that is an issue, even if they still, perhaps we still allow them to choose a gas stove, but make sure they understand what they're choosing.
So I think the question you had at the beginning there was, could we utilize other appliances in option number 3? And the way staff envisions option number 3 is basically a very similar ordinance to what we currently have. It's just going about it from a different direction. It's taking away NOx burning appliances rather than requiring all electric construction. But it would apply to all of the same appliances that we currently have. And it would also, again, staff would envision that it would include the same exemptions that we have for those appliances right now.
If I could follow up on that a little bit, I guess maybe more for the town attorney on the legality of it. We have a couple, I think you had 2 cities, Campbell and somebody else, that had already gone this way. It worries me a little bit of the legality also, because I know who can regulate NOx is probably also a controlled item.
Well, the case against Berkeley was brought because the plaintiffs argued that the city's regulation was dictating what sorts of appliances could be used. And so the question is, will that same argument apply here? And it's an unknown at this point.
And really, NOx is regulated by BACMed. The question will be, will somebody come and say, well, no, you can't regulate it, only BACMed can? I think that's it for my questions. Thanks.
Vice Mayor?
Yeah, thank you. I think this has raised some of the concerns that I had when this came before the Planning Commission years ago and before the council, and that is really my concern, that is Los Gatos, do we have better environmental engineers than the state of California to try to impact this? And with our footprint, what is the actual contribution of a municipality of 30,000 people? And I was concerned that we were getting ahead of the state on this, and apparently other cities got ahead of the state and were sued and now are rescinding. I guess fundamentally, I'm kind of interested why we have this letter. I didn't actually see the letter, but we have an exception for restaurants, correct? Then why is the Restaurant Association threatening us if we already have an exception for restaurants?
I discussed that with counsel for the Restaurant Association, and they mentioned that there are other interested parties in the litigation. And she didn't go into who they were, but I suspect that the association also works with perhaps home builders or other people who have an interest in what's allowed.
Yeah, I suspect it's developers who are trying to cut costs. And I just don't, I'm concerned about us being in the front line. So I don't know if we're going to get to further discussion or motions. But.
Well, I need to take public comment. So if we don't have any further questions at this moment, I'm going to open public comment. And at this point, I have 2 speaker cards, Johanna Swenberg, followed by Linda Swenberg.
Good evening. My name is Johannes Swemberg. Thank you, Madam Mayor, Town Council, public officials. I'm speaking on this item 10 about the REACH Code amendments. I'm speaking to urge the council and implore the council to adopt option 1. Specifically, repeal the existing REACH Code and allow natural gas in new buildings and major remodels. I actually want to speak not on my behalf, but on behalf of people that aren't here, can't be here, or not even yet here, because future residents will be negatively affected by this. I simply see this as an issue of fairness. Today, most residents and property owners have natural gas as an option for vital heating and cooking options. This is a critical choice as we all face power outages each year. Beyond the inconvenience of power outages, this could be harmful for those who are unable to have home heating during cooler times, and especially for the elderly or for those lacking the means or ability to get up and go. We have had senior friends who needed heating in winter times, and without gas, they would have simply had to go cold. This isn't fair, and it can be harmful. For the existing residents, our property is what it is, but denying future residents this option of a legal, safe, and standard for home heating and cooking just is not fair. Furthermore, remedies to address concerns about power outages would explicitly result in significant costs to a property owner when considering adding solar and batteries, which can easily be over $50,000. Again, this isn't fair. When we talk about making homes more affordable, we are actually adding hidden costs and taking away options from residents and owners. This is a new form of housing disparity and anti-affordability. If the town wants to rid the town of gas, do so for all residents, not just the unrepresented future residents. However, if this were the case, I think the feedback you would receive would be very obvious. Please vote for option 1. Establishing a housing disparity just simply is not fair. Thank you.
Thank you. Linda Swenberg, please come forward.
Hi. Good evening, council members. I also strongly urge you to adopt option 1, allowing natural gas in all buildings. Recently, my sister survived Hurricane Helene. Her community was devastated and cut off from the outside world for weeks. She lives just outside of Asheville. Luckily, her family had propane gas on their property, and it enabled them to cook, run their well, and provide essential services to neighbors who didn't have access to fuel. This experience highlights a critical benefit missing from option 1, and it should be in the pros: power outage and disaster preparedness. I'm concerned that restricting natural gas leaves our residents vulnerable during crises and also power outages, and we have a lot of those. In our home, gas fireplaces have kept us warm during winter power outages, and again, we've had a lot of those. Residents need alternative fuel sources, which option 1 would provide. Now, I do have an induction cooktop in my house. I like it. It's expensive, okay? But I want to tell you, I appreciate your concerns about indoor air pollution, but I believe the focus on fuel type is misguided. Even with our induction cooktop and electric oven, we require proper ventilation to maintain air quality while we cook. We have to turn on our vent hood, and everybody has to do that and should do that. Studies on indoor air pollution that I've read that you're probably relying on overlook ventilation's crucial role. We don't know if people are turning that on in their home during these studies. Our building codes already require venting for gas appliances. Instead of restricting fuel choices, why don't you incorporate consumer education into the permitting process? This could include information about proper ventilation usage and maintenance and guidelines for reducing indoor air pollution during cooking. Knowledge is power. You can effectively mitigate indoor air pollution concerns without limiting fuel options. I urge you to prioritize resident safety and well-being. Repeal these reach codes and adopt option 1, ensuring our community has access to natural gas for emergency preparedness and alternative energy. In closing, I think it's important to reiterate what I started with. Our local government should really learn from what happened after Helene. You should understand the value of natural gas to community resilience during disasters.
Thank you. No questions? Thank you. Do we have any virtual hands on Zoom?
There are no hands on Zoom.
Would any speaker like to come forward? With that, I'm going to close public comment, and I am going to start with my comment, and that I fully support repealing the existing REACH code with option 1. For the reasons just stated by the two speakers, it eliminates the risk of litigation and provides freedom of choice. Let's also talk about equitable opportunities and a sense of belonging for all residents. There are residents that cook with open flames, and that's key to their ethnic cuisines that's reflective of their identity and heritage. I would not want to prohibit them that opportunity. The town's goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions would still be in effect. We'd be relying on state building code requirements applicable to builders who opt to use natural gas. And due to the expense of the requirements, it's likely anyway that most builders will opt to provide only electrical connections. Councilmember Bristow.
Thank you. I do have a question for our building inspector, Robert. My experience is that new gas stoves will not operate without electricity. I had an old gas stove that I've just replaced with induction and an electric oven. However, my understanding is the new gas stoves have an electronic ignition, and you can't just turn on the gas, let it flow, and light it with a match. Am I wrong?
I think that is correct, that there may be some models that are different than that, but yes, for the ignition system, it does require some sort of power source.
Okay, because that was a concern my husband had, is that during a power outage, we wouldn't be able to cook. And I'm like, we wouldn't if we bought a new gas stove, and we're not doing that. Similarly, in my experience, when the power goes out, my furnace doesn't work, my gas furnace.
That would be the exact same scenario. You need the power for the ignition source of the gas.
Okay, so I know that my gas dryer, which I hope to replace, my gas furnace, which I hope to replace with a heat pump, and my gas stove that I have replaced, none of those would have worked in a power outage.
That's correct.
Okay. I mean, one of the things I'm thinking about is I don't necessarily want to put onerous restrictions on people. I also do get concerned about, after the San Bruno explosion years ago, I think about all of the infrastructure we have, our water infrastructure, our sewer infrastructure, our electrical grid, and the gas lines. And the gas lines have been in for a long time. Things can go wrong. They're going to need to be replaced. I think it would be a really great day if we just didn't have gas running underneath and you don't have to worry about somebody digging or drilling and hitting a gas line and blowing everything up. So that's one thing that runs through my head. Another is that, this law these REACH codes may not be necessary where all of our new construction that may be coming will have to dual plumb, and I can't imagine a developer is going to want to put in gas throughout a complex, or if they're putting in 50 homes, they're also going to put in gas and electric, so that may take care of itself. I think about the greater efficiency with windows. The housing in phase 1 of North 40, while I was at those hearings, to prevent pollution from the freeway, the windows along the freeway side on those homes don't open, so that people can't have the window open next to the freeway. And I just think about the fact that as you seal up homes more and more, you have a lot more internal pollution. And we do know that gas stoves are a source of air pollution. If you have any kind of gas appliance in your home, you need a carbon monoxide detector. And, so there's always a risk of being poisoned. So to me, electric makes so much more sense. I don't know what the legal repercussions are. I actually appreciate that instead of saying what kind of appliance, calling out gas appliances and saying you can't have gas appliances, we look at a pollution source that we know is harmful, NOx, and say we don't want new installations of NOx-producing appliances, and it just follows that those are gas appliances. They may be other things. So I actually felt like that was a pretty good approach because for all the reasons that we passed REACH codes before, we'd be achieving the same thing. There is a risk that at some point, there's a risk with any decision you make that there could be a lawsuit and then you have to change course. And at this point, because we're being forced by the Berkeley decision to look at our REACH code right now, we may or may not in the future have to look at reducing NOx. So I found that kind of intriguing because we can stay where we wanted to be with another approach. So I'm kind of leaning toward option 3, although I would say that given that new construction will have to dual plumb, gas may go extinct soon enough anyway. And then the other thing is we may only be 30,000 people, but I do care about new residents. I care about their kids. I care about people not knowing that they're being exposed to air pollution. I know that there is, I know Assemblymember Gail Pellerin is working on a state law that would actually label all new gas appliances with warnings so people know what kind of pollution they'd be getting inside their homes. I don't know where that's going. So people might have more information because I think a lot of people were told gas is clean, there's no downside, and we know that that's not true. But I'm looking forward to hearing from other council members because I definitely was leaning toward option 3. I think option 2 is just going to be too onerous and too expensive. I think it could achieve what we wanted, but it's going to be too staff intensive and it won't eliminate gas anyway, and it would be a lot of work to maybe get to where we can get just with time. So those are my thoughts right now.
Councilmember Moore, followed by the Vice Mayor. Was that your hand up, Vice Mayor? Okay. Councilmember Moore?
Thank you, Mayor. Councilmember Risto stated a lot of what I wanted to say much more articulately than I would have, so I really appreciate all of her comments. I agree wholeheartedly with everything she said. I really, really like option 3. I think option 3 makes a lot of sense for Los Gatos. I will not vote to support option 1. I think that as a municipality, it is our absolute obligation to do everything we can to protect the health of our residents, to protect our environment, and to combat climate change. I think that all of these are, different kinds of collective action problems that are easy to, not look at when it's just one town like Los Gatos, but on the whole, as a state, as a world, we all need to do our part. And I think this REACH code is us, this potential amendment is us doing our part. I think the future of our community depends on this. We actually had, I don't know if he spoke with each of you individually, but we had a student named Vipas attend numerous council meetings with my understanding being the main goal of his was to talk about this specific item. He had to go back or he's going to school now at UC Santa Barbara, but he just graduated from Los Gatos High School. And we had a couple of conversations about how concerned he was that he didn't feel like his community, Los Gatos, was doing enough to combat climate change. And that was super concerning to me because I really think that we are a community that cares about protecting our environment, preventing pollution. And so I think this is an excellent way to do that. And so I think for all of those reasons, this is important. And then to kind of go a little bit further into what Councilmember Risto was talking about with, public health and people not being aware of the dangers of cooking with gas indoors with the windows closed and no venting. I think that absolutely to one of the public comments, I think that very much is an education issue, but I think the problem is that a lot of people just aren't ever going to get that education and aren't aware of that when the state law that was referenced or the proposed state law to label new gas stoves with warning labels about the pollution that comes out of them and the dangers of them. The catalyst for that was that there was very little understanding of that, and that most people who had gas stoves did not open their windows, did not use the hood vent, and didn't realize that the hood vent was really necessary for protecting health. Just when cooking normally on a gas stove. So I think that it's really, when we're talking about future residents, I think it's really important to recognize that a lot of those are going to be younger people who, many of whom, climate change is an absolute top priority for them when they think about what they care about and what they care about their government doing. And so I really like option 3, and I think we should move in that direction.
Vice Mayor?
So I'm not going to step into the...
I'm sorry? I didn't see Councilmember Rennie with his hand up, no. Oh, sorry. Okay, Vice Mayor?
Sorry, I'm not going to step into the realm of being an environmental engineer. I'm not, and I'm concerned about the town taking on that type of responsibility without having the expertise. I do think, but I do know some facts. I bought a gas range about 2 years ago, a Samsung range, and you can light it with a match. In our neighborhood, it has an electronic ignition, but when the electricity's off, it doesn't click, and you take a match out and you light it. In our neighborhood, we've experienced increasing power outages during the 30 years that we've lived there. PG&E does not do a good job of trimming the trees and preparing for storms, and it's gotten worse. We had 3 serious outages last week. My family appreciates the fact that we can light a match and cook some soup on a cold day. The heat doesn't work because that has an electric blower. It's a gas furnace. But the hot water was available over several days' time. Our electricity, in my opinion, has gotten less reliable, and this move puts us more dependent on an electrical system that is actually less reliable. So it may be a great idea, but I think it's ahead of its time. And I think that we should follow the state agencies, state EPA, the Bay Area QMD, and other agencies that are well equipped to evaluate this and to change the regulations as they're required. I also think that option 3 is fundamentally the same restriction that was prohibited by the court, just for a different reason. And so I'm sitting here thinking, why do we think this won't be challenged legally? It's the same restriction. They've just gotten a different reason for it. And I'm concerned about where we're putting our resources in town, especially in the realm of defending legal challenges. We know that we have or will have significant legal challenges over the excessive development that's proposed for our town. And those are things that I think we're going to be scrambling to figure out how to fund that work. And so I think number 3 is not money well spent if it leads to a legal challenge that we then again have to come back and revise our code or to potentially be sued by an organization. And I find that the organization is, it just strikes me as not credible that we're being challenged by the restaurant organization when we have an exception for restaurants. So clearly it's someone else, some other group that is challenging this. And, until we figure that out, I don't think it's worth putting the effort into it. So at this point, it makes sense to me to revert to option one for the time being, and then let's see whether we can get some movement on a regional basis or on a state basis to improve the safety with natural gas. So I'm in favor of option one.
Okay, Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mayor. So just to say a few more things about this, I really think that to say that we are ahead of our time on this issue, I just do not agree with. I think that climate change and pollution are issues that we are way behind on, that these are issues that we should have been addressing, before I was born. And I think that I fundamentally believe that Los Gatos needs to do its part. From my understanding of what the town attorney shared with us, we can rescind if we decide to adopt an ordinance that is then challenged, or if another community is challenged, like Campbell or Los Altos Hills, who have already adopted, a very similar ordinance, we can repeal this ordinance and figure out next steps from there. But right now, I think for us to legitimately represent the interests of our residents who care deeply about the environment, climate change, and public health, we need to ensure that we are doing our part to mitigate all of those risks. And so with that, I move to direct staff to proceed with option 3, which repeals portions of the existing REACH code and sets NOx emission appliance thresholds that regulate air quality.
So before, I just have a quick question since we have a motion on the table. Did you need a motion? I think you were just looking for direction. You've taken comments from council members, but did you want a motion?
It's fine to receive a motion, so this will provide us direction that we will then return to the council with.
Okay, Councilmember Moore, did you want to finish up, or was it well stated without me?
That's all I have. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Risto?
Thank you. I'll second the motion for discussion. And I actually, I know that I'm not an environmental engineer, but I know that we have a multitude of studies and information telling us that gas is an indoor pollutant, that it's a health risk. This town and a previous council prohibited smoking in our parks and in multifamily housing. I know that it's important as a town to take action where we can. I completely sympathize with the vice mayor. He lives in a part of town that has had very poor electrical service over the last year. Every time there's a storm or a whiff of a storm, or I don't know, a squirrel jumps on a power line, that neighborhood has lost power, and that is a problem. On the other hand, from the robustness, and that's a local issue, the robustness of the grid, the Mercury News covered this. At the end of the summer, we had no brownouts and we had no blackouts. With battery backup, the electric grid has been incredibly robust, and the state of California and the local power companies are coming up to speed with being able to produce the electricity that we need. We are not telling people that have gas appliances already that they have to take them out. We are just asking for people to move into the future with electricity, and I think we're already behind on that, as Councilmember Moore put it. Climate change is an existential threat, and I think we owe it to our children and the people around us to take measures where we can. I also look at this as an incredibly low cost. This is not a huge litigation cost for our staff. This is a relatively simple change for us, and if another lawsuit comes through in the next couple of years and it extends to other cities, then we can make our change then. But I don't really want to reverse a good decision that we made in 2022 when we can pursue going electric through this approach of eliminating NOx, which is important. Thank you.
Vice Mayor.
Yeah, so just a comment on Los Gatos and our responsibility for the environment. I want to just address that because I would just want to say that personally, I was involved in organizing our community in the first Earth Day in 1970 when I was 16 years old. And I was protesting some of the chemical companies and things that were going on. And we effectively did change the law, and we changed the pollution in the town that I grew up in. And I'm really focused on things that are pragmatic and can actually make a difference. And I think that Los Gatos, our effort should be put in those kinds of areas, not in areas that are symbolic or areas that we're making a stand to make a point. I don't think that's what we've been elected to do. I'd like to work on laws and regulations that actually make a difference, and I'm concerned that number 3 would just be symbolic because it's fundamentally the same restriction that was challenged before, and I don't see why we would think that it wouldn't be challenged again. In the meantime, we're wasting cycles on doing something that's symbolic. So, you know, I just think that we need to think about where we can actually have an impact rather than just saying a bunch of words.
Ms. Wood, we'll need a roll call vote. We have a motion and a second, and I see no further hands up for comments.
Councilmember Bristow?
Aye.
Councilmember Rennie?
Aye.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Hudas?
No.
Mayor Badami?
No. Motion passes 3-2. The mayor and vice mayor opposed. All right, we are going to take a 10-minute break. I'm sorry. Yes? Yes, we are going to take a 10-minute break. Ms. Burnham, thank you. We're looking forward to your staff report.
Thank you. There is a presentation that will be up, but in the meantime, I am Nicole Burnham. I am your Director of Parks and Public Works. With me tonight, I have Nick Turner, who is our supervising equipment mechanic who works for Parks and Public Works. We also have Juliana Callahan with us, who is the intern that wrote the report and did the analysis that's included in attachment 1. And also with us this evening is our police chief. As you'll learn through this presentation, police is one of our biggest customers in Fleet. And so their coordination and support for this item has been critically important. They've worked with us and they continue to work closely with us on fleet-related items. We can go to the next slide. So I'm going to kind of just give you some highlights of the report, and also we are seeking for you to take action on Town Council Policy 4-05 tonight. Next slide. So by way of background, as of May 2024, when Ms. Callahan completed her analysis, the town owned 122 assets, 83 of which were vehicles. And that includes marked and unmarked police cars. It also includes trucks and vehicles used by Parks and Public Works for daily maintenance, and also specialty items such as vacuum trucks and street sweepers, paint trucks that we need in order to maintain the infrastructure and assets of the town. Equipment, which makes up 39 of the 122 total items, includes things like trailers, chippers, radar speed signs that police use for managing speed, movable message boards, but it also includes tow-behind generators, compressors, hand tools. So all of those are things we think about in the mix, and all of them get maintained by Nick. And I just wanted to note that, since the report was produced, staff has been evaluating the need for certain assets. And we've been working to divest some of the items that we've identified are excess. In addition, the acquisition and sale of vehicles slated for replacement has continued. So if you're like me, you want to know this static list of fleet and equipment items, and you just want it to be that, and you want to know exactly what it is. And I think the moral of the story is it is an evolving and living organism, because we're always making improvements and modifications. So the value of those assets, thanks to some information provided by our finance department, is estimated at $7.9 million in today's dollars. So the assessment that Ms. Callahan completed for us included 3 key recommendations. So we outlined those in the memo, and I'll walk you through them this evening. Next slide. So the first is the Town Council Policy 4-05. So one of the first things noted was that this policy has not been modified since 1998. And there were some recommendations made by Juliana as she did her work in discussing with us and PD what we needed to do. So a couple of changes that were made. One was to clarify and reduce the type of asset classes that are defined in the policy. The current policy has an excessively long list, and its definitions were even confusing to some of us. So one of the things that we did was streamline that list to make it clearer, hopefully for all of us going forward. We also are proposing to extend the life of assets. So when we think about replacement of vehicles, it's based on a combination of the age of the vehicle, the mileage of the vehicle, and also maintenance records. But age of the vehicle is that first marker that really triggers us to look at a vehicle for replacement. And once we start talking about it, we just recognize that vehicles last longer now than they did in the 90s, and most vehicles also have longer warranty periods than they did then. So we felt it made sense and would be, in the long run, a cost savings to the town to reflect a longer life expectancy of our vehicles. We added a clause, or proposing to add a clause, to encourage the use of hybrids and EVs. We don't have a stated policy about this, so this is the first time that would show up. And we just believe, following up from the conversation we just had on Reach Codes, this is just a responsibility that we have to look to these technologies and use them to the best of our abilities wherever we can. We're going to talk a lot more about EV in the next slide. We also wanted to develop a procedure for how vehicles get added to the equipment replacement list. And to be clear, there's an equipment list and vehicle list of 122 items. And then there's a replacement list that finance uses, and that's in your operating budget. And that's the list that finance is using to project over the life of the budget how much they need to budget to replace vehicles. Not every asset we own is on the replacement list. So that's something we're going to continue to reconcile and evaluate. But our concern is we don't necessarily want new things to be on the replacement list because they unless they're absolutely needed, because it represents a long-term cost to the town. And if we do acquire assets, be it through grants or whatever, that end up needing to be on the replacement list, we think council should know that. Because the first one may be free, but if we decide to replace it in the future, it may be on the town's responsibility to pay for it. So those are the changes we've proposed as part of the policy. You have a red line and a changes accepted version of that policy in the packet. We'll go to the next slide. So zero emission vehicle mandates is something we're going to spend a little bit of time on with this. So the California Air Resources Board, or CARB, implemented clean fleet regulations that require most fleet operators to transition medium and heavy duty vehicles to be zero emission. That means all electric. Medium and heavy duty are the vehicles that are over 8,500 pounds of gross vehicle weight. And that could be an F-250. So it depends, it's not a huge vehicle that we're talking about. It's not always a dump truck. So starting in this year, 2024, 50% of all new medium and heavy duty vehicles that we buy as a town must be zero emission vehicles. By 2027, all of our new vehicles in the medium and heavy duty class must be zero emission. And to be clear, this only pertains to vehicles that we newly purchase. We're not being, and it only pertains to the medium and heavy duty vehicles. We're not being asked to replace our entire fleet at the same time. But we have been working on pathways to compliance for this regulation for the 26 vehicles in our fleet that are affected by it. And this includes identifying potential replacement vehicles. One of the challenges with this regulation is that all the vehicles that we use and operate don't necessarily have a zero emission equivalent. So that's, and ones that do, the technology may not be proven. So we're looking at that and trying to pick our way through that. We will be considering keeping some of the combustion engine vehicles longer to delay the need, because again, we don't have to go to zero emission until we actually until we replace the vehicle. And also just evaluating the use case for vehicles to determine if a smaller internal combustion engine or hybrid vehicle might allow us to complete the work that needs to be completed. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about with regard to compliance with this regulation. We're also working to identify the location, cost, and funding for the charging infrastructure that's going to be needed to support this. So SVCE has funded design, and we are working with their consultant now. There are some PG&E grant programs, but we don't believe they'll cover the entire cost of the infrastructure. So when we do CIP study session later this year, by then we should have a cost estimate for what we're looking at for charging infrastructure. I also wanted to mention that this regulation comes with a not insignificant reporting burden. In spring of 2024, we had to upload all of the information of all of our vehicles and assets into a CARB database. It included an inordinate amount of information about every vehicle we own, including things like the engine serial number. So, which was not information that we normally would keep or have at our disposal. So that was a big lift, and thank God we had Juliana to do that. And we will need to continue to update that information annually. So it's going to continue to be an ongoing challenge for us to be able to comply with this requirement. And the penalty points for non-compliance are pretty high, $10,000 per vehicle per day, if we do not meet the requirements and standards. And they are also saying that CARB will have the authority to deny registration of new vehicles into our fleet if we haven't met the requirements. So they're very serious about this regulation. So it's something very much on our mind. So next slide. So the last thing that the recommendations that were made in the report or discussed in the report was the idea of considering staffing and how we staff our fleet operation and what some of the advantages and disadvantages are of that. So right now, our supervising mechanic, we have 1.5 FTEs. Basically, we have Nick, who's here with us tonight, and then we have another half of a mechanic that works part-time, unbenefited. And when we think about mechanics, we also often think about like the wrench turning time, that there's, time they're spending under the hood of a vehicle. Because of our staffing model, we have our supervising mechanic doing a pretty inordinate amount of non-wrench turning time of work, including maintenance of non-vehicle assets like the generator here at Town Hall. When power goes out in the middle of the night and that needs to keep running because dispatch is here, Nick comes. He is often one of the people that will come. He's making sure it has fuel. He maintains our generator at our site as well, the stationary generators. They are big, significant assets and pieces of equipment that require a mechanic for support. Our fuel island at the fleet yard also, the one fuel island that serves all the vehicles in town, he manages that. He's also taken on the role of completing and ensuring regulatory compliance of all the vehicles and equipment assets. This includes emissions testing, the CARB reporting. He's going to take that over. Asset management system management, registering our vehicles. So there's a lot of kind of traditional mechanic time that we spend to support our fleet. And he could probably talk at length about that even more than I can. So things we're thinking about with that, I mentioned earlier, we've been looking at reducing the number of assets that we own and operate. The low-hanging fruit left the yard this summer. And I think now the things that we're starting to think about are going to have operating impacts. And so we need to think about what that looks like and how we might deliver services if we don't have, a vac truck. How are we going to clean our storm drains every year and meet that legal requirement? So there's going to be trade-offs for managing assets. We have discussed leasing certain assets. We went so far as to meet with a potential leasing company to consider whether we could lease some certain non-PD assets, and then we could bake the cost of maintenance of those into the lease, and the leasing agency could do that. We haven't done a full analysis of cost benefit of that yet. I'm curious to hear council's thoughts on that. We also sort of started to realize, when you go into a lease program, we would start turning over vehicles every 3 to 4 years. And I think there's a question in my mind around the environmental implications of that, just in terms of the manufacturing process and sourcing of raw materials. So it's a question that, believe it or not, I've been put forward to a group at Stanford that's doing some work on analyzing fleets, and they've reached out. Anyway, so I'm hoping we're going to get some more feedback over time, because I think in response to the clean air regulations, a lot of communities are looking at leasing, and we're wondering if there's going to be an unintended consequence of that. So happy to hear council's feedback on that item. And of course, there's always the option to add staff, which would either, could look like a mechanic, to allow the supervising mechanic more time to do the non-wrench turning items, a fleet manager that could provide the strategic oversight that's really needed to meet these CARB regulations and help us fulfill all of our administrative and regulatory mandates, or even administrative support that could perform some of the asset tasks and some of these supporting tasks. So those are some of the things that we've been thinking about, and we wanted to come here tonight and give this presentation to you, and we're looking forward to hearing feedback from council.
Thank you, Ms. Burnham. Looking to my council members, Vice Mayor, for questions.
Yeah, I have a lot of comments, but I had a basic fundamental question. So right now, are we purchasing 50% of our new vehicles? Are we of the one, the medium and heavy duty, are they ZEVs that we're purchasing now?
I'm going to let Nick chime in on that because he can give you more details. But my understanding is in this fiscal year, we have 2 vehicles that meet the criteria. And yes, one of them, I believe he's looking at a ZEV.
Yeah, that's correct. Over the 8,500 pound rule. So medium duty. So we are looking at a potential zero emissions vehicle alternative.
And, just one follow-up to that. Excluding the capital infrastructure to put in the charging, which we know we don't have, what's the difference in total cost of ownership for the vehicles, the ZEVs that we're purchasing now versus the vehicles, the ICE vehicles that we purchased?
Nick, can you chime in on that?
I believe the cost will go up just because of the new technology and the fact that there's not a huge market for it yet. This Clean Fleets Act is really only mandated in the state of California right now. So a lot of these new technologies, new battery technologies, come at a cost. I do believe the maintenance of the vehicle will go down just because we don't have the same type of maintenance that you would require on a internal combustion engine vehicle. So I think the big concerns are, your upfront costs plus your, what are we going to be charged for electricity to charge that vehicle?
I would just suggest that maybe we work closely with our finance group who's doing or helping us with budgeting, because over the next, looks like between now and 2027, we're going to have to move to 100% ZEVs, and this is, I believe, an unfunded mandate from the state saying you have to do this, but not giving us any money to do it. And so I think we need to work really closely because in addition to the capital infrastructure, which we know is going to be challenging, I'm also interested in the total cost of ownership. Thank you.
Okay, any further questions from council members? Seeing none, I'm going to open public comment. Do we have any virtual hands on Zoom?
There are no hands on Zoom.
I have no speaker cards, so I'm going to close public comment, go back to council for comments and or a motion. Councilmember Risto.
Thank you. The Vice Mayor and I saw a version of some of this at the Policy Committee. So first of all, I appreciate the looking through all of the assets, lumping them into fewer categories, making that more understandable. I'm sure just understanding all of the assets we had and how they fit in and how you're going to keep track of them was a lot of work, but hopefully will require less work going forward. This is tough. I mean, these unfunded mandates happen all the time. I can appreciate that if California is the only state right now requiring this, and there's a lot of specialized types of trucks or vehicles, it's not like you can check and look at 6 different models and decide which one is right. So I don't know, Nick, if you can speak to that. I'm curious to know, is there a ZEV match for everything we have? So can you explain to me what's going to happen going forward? Are we going to have to redefine what kind of work our vehicles do and change how the work is done?
Yeah, good question. So I do feel that more options are going to become available in the future. The Clean Fleets Act is also looking at some exemptions, and they're supposed to give us those on the 1st of January. So, and that includes a lot of trucks that we currently have. So there might be some exemptions for the time being to purchase new internal combustion engines if their electric zero emission vehicle is not available. But I do see it going that way in the future. It's hard to see when that stuff will actually come to market. I know that other states are trying to adopt this same type of emissions act. So I think with more states coming on board, that's going to push manufacturers to have to build this stuff, not want to build. So as of today, though, yeah, our options are pretty slim.
And just to add, thank you so much, Nick. Just to add to that, as Nick alluded to, legislation like this, sometimes the intention is to drive demand and drive it in the market. And so I believe that was the intention here. There are some unintended consequences for the fact that there isn't a perfect match for all of our needs. And so, like Nick has mentioned, they're trying to address some of that. Hopefully it will be enough, but we're in this interesting chicken and egg situation.
And I'll just add that in talking to other jurisdictions, I talked to one local jurisdiction that a couple of years ago purchased a zero emission trash collection truck, and it has been in the shop more than it's been out. So it's been really challenging for them. And, it's obviously it's only one of their fleet of trucks, but it's just until the technology improves and is there, I think there's going to be some wonkiness along the way.
Councilmember Risto, followed by Councilmember Rennie.
Thank you. So kind of to continue on that, I was going to ask about other municipalities. I'm assuming that we don't replace a vehicle because all the wheels fell off and it's dead. So there's hopefully some leeway with, okay, we can extend the life of this vehicle a little bit. And then is there any option, if we have specialized assets that aren't used frequently, to share with another municipality? I mean, I don't know. My guess is every one of these assets is not in use 7 days a week, and there might be things like the vacuum truck. I don't know how often that's used, but is that something that we could share with another city while we're both trying to get up to speed on that?
I will start this, and I think Nick will be able to put some color on it. I think the answer is yes and no. We own a vac truck. We, in the past, have had sharing agreements with, like Cupertino has rented it from us because they didn't own one. They now own one. There are some things assets, like I said, that I think we need to own them because of the amount of work they get. But there's also, I think, opportunity. One of the interesting things about municipal fleets is that they tend to be low mileage. And so one of the exemptions that I actually didn't know existed, I learned about it today as I was doing more research for this meeting. There's an exemption for vehicles that drive less than 1,000 miles a year. So that's something we'll need to look at. We may be able to qualify for that. And to your point, there's also an exemption for mutual aid vehicles. So we may be able to get creative, but I think they're only if they're used in a disaster. So anyway, there's a lot of complexity here to think about. And Nick, I don't know if you have other examples or things to add.
Yeah, the sharing of assets is something that we've done in the past. And one caveat I can add, though, is that we've had things returned to us that's been damaged. So that also now puts us behind because we have to fix that before it can go back into service. So I believe Nicole kind of hit the nail on the head where it's a yes and no. I believe we can share assets and maybe use assets that we don't from other jurisdictions that we don't use on a daily basis, and that might be something to look forward in the future.
Yeah. Councilmember Rennie.
Well, I guess two comments. First, I would prioritize getting rid of any diesel because the PM 2.5 particles from the diesel really do have an effect on people's lung development, particularly young people's lung development. So I would put priority there. I know a couple of years ago we went through this. We bought a very large piece of equipment, truck or something, that just wasn't available except in diesel. And so that was kind of unfortunate. But again, I would try to put emphasis on the diesel vehicles. Of course, we have to follow whatever the law says on the zero emission, but that's my thought on the priority. You asked a question about how to deal with the maintenance. Again, I always hesitate to add staff. So I think Councilmember Hudes brought up a good question about sort of what's the total life cycle cost of it? What are the options? That's not really shown here. My gut feel says we would be better off with your option of leasing so that somebody else was doing the maintenance and we wouldn't have to be adding additional maintenance staff. So just giving feedback that without seeing any kind of real cost analysis in the difference, my gut feel is to try to limit adding staff. Thank you.
Councilmember Moore.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll chime in with a couple of thoughts too. So first, I really appreciate you all bringing this forward to us. I think modernizing our town's fleet is important, and this is clearly a big conversation that I think involves a lot of logistics and moving parts. So thank you for all of this. So a few things. I'm not at all opposed to leasing or sharing vehicles if that's something that makes sense for PPW. Same with looking into the low mileage exemptions and those sorts of things. I think getting creative on this makes a lot of sense. I really, feel like I want to learn from the expertise of the people that are using these vehicles every day and the PPW staff. So I am totally looking to you all to lean on your guidance and expertise on this, on what makes sense moving forward. Because I think 2027 seems really soon to get to purchasing 100% of our vehicles being zero emissions. I think that seems really soon when we don't have a charging bay that I know we'll be talking about in the future. But yeah, that timeline seems fast. And so I really like the idea of exploring potentially purchasing smaller internal combustion engine vehicles where, especially where zero emission equivalent doesn't exist, or where it just better suits our needs. I think, large vehicles present, a number of not just emissions, but other, I think, concerns. And I agree with what Councilmember Rennie said about diesel. And so if there are, sort of step down options that we can go to a smaller, more efficient, gas vehicle rather than a large diesel vehicle, for instance, I think that would be a good thing to do. And I think does, get us closer to the goals here of being cleaner and more energy efficient. And then I very much agree with the concerns about there being slim or poor options in the market. I also agree that this mandate was it very much seems to be something that should push the industry forward and create more access to green vehicles. But I have seen a number of these sort of smaller zero emission car and truck companies go out of business. I know someone that bought a car from one of these smaller companies, went out of business, and then the car is basically bricked, right? Especially because they have sophisticated computers that are no longer receiving updates. And so I think that can get really complicated. And so I would, I think at a high level, caution us against, jumping into, $100,000 purchases of zero emission trucks and things when there's maybe there's only one, so we feel like we have to pick that one. That seems to be somewhere where maybe we could look more into leasing or sharing. So I think overall, trying to lengthen the life of our existing piece of our fleet makes sense. But yeah, I think this is as Councilmember Risto said, this is tough. So thanks for bringing this to us.
Councilmember Risto, followed by the Vice Mayor.
Regarding the leasing, one of the things because Director Burnham, you brought up that leases are typically 3 years. What would that do to our expenses? Because we're now changing our policy of keeping cars for 6 years, and in general, we have very low mileage. And so now if instead of renewing a vehicle, having to get a new vehicle every 6 years, we're coming up with a new lease every 3 years, won't that drive the cost of the vehicle up? And then we've got the maintenance baked into it?
I think that's the fundamental question we're going to need to answer and do some more really deep work with a leasing entity and see if we can come up with the answer to that question. I think I have concerns about it. And I think there's probably, for some vehicles, maybe it makes sense, and for others it doesn't. I think the advantage of municipal issue here that I know in the finance structure, and I've touched on it very, very briefly, you know, over the summer as we were talking about the concept. And I think, I don't want to put words in her mouth, but I think she's agreed that it's probably not a bad thing for us to look at. But I don't know what the financial implications will be for sure. I don't know. Gita, have you ever looked at it for other infrastructure?
Okay, so Gita Ungvari, Finance Director. So in the past, the town, before this regulation, was regularly approached by leasing agency by common sense. If you don't have a workflow, some cash flow issue, then leasing is always more expensive than owning it and buying it, especially if it's a good quality of vehicle. But I think we have to do that analysis, especially if we consider the maintenance. So I just agree with Director Burnham on that.
Okay, thank you. And I mean, that's a great point with the low mileage, that, you know, we're almost an ideal candidate for it from that point of view. Thanks.
Vice Mayor.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, the report is excellent, and I think it has really taken us several steps forward from where we were. And thank you to Ms. Callahan for working on this and for doing a physical inventory as well, which I was always concerned about. And so I think we're in a much better position. And I think as a whole, the policy itself, I'm supportive of. I was supportive of it during the policy committee meeting. What I am going to say is maybe taken as a bit critical, but I'm trying to understand why we have so many assets. And I was a little shocked at 122, given that we have 155 employees. And then I looked at the table that was provided, and I looked at Campbell. Campbell has 50% fewer assets than Los Gatos does, but it has more residents. So, we have significantly more assets, 52% higher, and 68% higher on a per resident basis. I think that's correct. Is that the case from what we understand of looking at Campbell?
Based on the information that we have available, yes. I wanted to confirm that number just to make sure I understood it. And I'm sorry I didn't have time to do that today. I was going to call Campbell. And it's possible that number doesn't. They do lease some vehicles, so they may not include their lease vehicles in that number. I would also just point out, so we have 83 vehicles, so that are used on a day-to-day basis. Some of them are pool vehicles. So every employee doesn't have a vehicle, I promise. And I think PD has the most need, and they also drive, have the most mileage for sure. And then I think with regard, Nick and I were talking earlier today about the equipment and the equipment that we have, and I think he had some thoughts on sort of our equipment inventory and how that might stand in comparison to other jurisdictions. So I'll let him weigh in on that.
Yeah, so I believe City of Campbell doesn't have a lot of the same equipment we have, and so they contract a lot of other services out, which is a possibility in the future if that's what the route we were to go. And also the, trying to think. I lost my train of thought here. Sorry. What was it? Can you ask the question one more time? Sorry.
Well, I was just asking how many vehicles does Campbell have? It appears, assets. It appears that it's 80 versus 122. Why is that? Why should Los Gatos have more assets than Campbell when we have a smaller population?
Right, and then also, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. We talked earlier about maybe if we do get rid of certain assets that we don't use on a daily basis or are only seasonally used, maybe looking into a lease for that seasonal time frame. So specifically the winter time, when we have flooding, clearing out embankments and things of that nature. We talked about maybe looking into leasing at just that certain time frame.
And we can definitely look into that comparison as we go along this, because I think it is a matter of services comparison.
Just, as a follow-up, I think that the policy is good. I think we're going to need to move forward with it. But I also think that it just raised an awareness. And I was taken aback when I heard that we had 122 assets. And it seems to me that, we need to really think about where our resources are going. We need to have excellent town staff. We may need to have even more mechanics to keep our ICE vehicles running so that we don't have to replace them with something that's more expensive. And also, the ICE vehicles are probably going to work better during a disaster than electric that depends, on the grid. So, I think that we're going to have to make some hard choices. But when I saw the part of the report that, that talked about the town being understaffed, I looked at it really the other way, that I don't know if it's a word, but it seemed to me like we're not understaffed, we're over-asseted for where we are. And that's not an issue for tonight, but I would really think that it would be productive for us to come and look at how can we reduce the vehicles, because every vehicle carries not only the purchase cost, there's the maintenance, there's the space, there's the liability. There are a whole series of things that come with owning these assets. And perhaps, leasing is a possibility, but perhaps rental is a possibility, or perhaps contracting for a service might be better as well. So I think that we should come back to this and look at how do we significantly reduce this fleet. And the fleet takes away from being able to spend money on other kinds of resources for the town. And so I think it's really worth looking at that in a future session. And the other thing I'm thinking about is the timing of this. So if all of these municipalities are going to be moving to ZEV, perhaps we ought to do it sooner and divest ourselves of some of these assets sooner while there's still a market for them. Because if everyone in whatever it's going to be, 2027 or 2030, is unloading their assets, there's not going to be any buyers for them. So I think that it's fairly urgent for us to look at this possibility. But I am, I'm happy to move forward with a motion for what's before us tonight. So I don't know if we're ready for that. But.
I know Risto had her, Councilmember Risto had her hand up, but I don't know if you want to make a comment or had a question, or were you going to?
I wanted to make a comment and ask a question.
Okay.
The difference between, for example, us and Campbell also jumped out at me with their higher population and assets. I don't know if the answer is knowable. I don't know if they count their assets the same way, because when I was looking through, we're not comparing car fleet to car fleet. And when I looked, and there's chippers and radar trucks and, a variety of other things, do we know that that whole universe of things that we counted as assets was counted by the city of Campbell, for example?
No, and I think that's, I was going to say, I think that's a really great question. And I think that was one of the challenges we had with the benchmarking was not every, you'd be surprised at the number of towns that aren't really clear on what's in their fleet, and they don't necessarily have, may not be counting it the same way because there's no clear definition, and it does vary town to town. And Chief.
And that's a great question, and it kind of leads into a little bit of what Councilmember Hudis was mentioning as well, because it comes down to a certain point of service assessment. What does the town really want in terms of the services? And what I'm speaking to is Campbell does not have a DART team, for instance. So on this, there's 4 assets that are specific to the DART team. That includes the ATV, a Suburban that pulls their trailer, which is also an asset on here. That Suburban is a 1999 Suburban, barely running. But it's necessary to get that equipment out there. And then the CERT team as well. There's a trailer that requires towing. So they don't have those assets. In addition, what we also have listed on here is mutual assets that are received through grant funding, through Homeland Security grant funding. And that includes on here as our anti-vehicle barriers. So those AVBs are on here as well, and that's a mutual asset that was purchased through SHISGAP funding, as well as some others. So what it is looking at what's the service model that we're looking for, because the service model dictates what the resources or the assets are on this list, and that might be different than other municipalities.
Okay, thank you. And then as a follow-on, I mean, the other thing I was thinking about with service is, if we look at what we could lease or rent, one concern I would be having is if we had a disaster and all of a sudden we need to try to rent a vehicle, or it's winter storm time and we've decided we're not going to own the equipment we use in the winter, we'll lease it at winter time, and everybody wants it and it's not available, that would be a concern. And I'm not saying I know what the right answer is, but I think that balance of, what are the trade-offs with leasing? What are the trade-offs? How much are we paying to have things that we don't use often, and how much is it worth to us to have it when we need it? And so, I agree with the vice mayor. I don't think we want to be over-asseted, but I think we need to understand the value of which things we need. And then I appreciate the chief's explanation, because not all municipalities offer the same services or the same level of service. I thought about the fact, okay, they have their own police department, but what don't they have? So with CERT and DART and some of the other things, apples and oranges, right? All right, thank you.
Vice Mayor, did you want to go ahead with your motion?
If it's okay. I move to receive the report entitled Town of Los Gatos Fleet Management Analysis, Attachment 1, and adopt a resolution to modify Town Council Policy 405, Town Vehicle and Equipment Acquisition and Replacement Policy, Attachment 3.
Councilmember Risto.
Thank you. I'll second the motion.
Ms. Wood, can we have a roll call vote?
Councilmember Risto?
Aye.
Councilmember Rennie?
Aye.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Hudas?
Aye.
Mayor Badami?
Aye. Passes unanimously. Okay, now we're ready to move on to item number 5, which was on our consent. Thank you for waiting so patiently. We have speakers waiting to speak. Ms. Burnham?
Yes,
I'm sorry, Ms. Nomura. You're going to be providing us with the report?
Actually, you had it correct. It was Director Burnham who will be giving the report.
Okay, all right. Ms. Burnham.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. So we did create just a quick presentation to facilitate some of this discussion. If we can get that up, but essentially, really what we came to ask Council for was the ability to authorize and execute a contract to complete a capital improvement project associated with improvements at the Civic Center, and also approving of the construction plans. And once we have the initial presentation, I just wanted to, if you go to slide, I think it's 3. So we wanted to just provide context in case, and make sure we're all speaking the same language about what is happening here. So I realize it's hard for me to talk to a graphic that's across the room, but on the left-hand side of this graphic, you see the big words lobby. That is right outside the doors here of council chambers. That is our lobby. And some of you may on occasion notice the door that is off to the right-hand side. That goes into, thank you, Wendy, so much. It's super helpful. So that door leads into a hallway that goes to our HR offices. So the green area that's shown down below is the area that is it currently houses our HR offices, but it also currently houses a portion of NUMU offices. So that is what we are proposing to construct out and build new as part of this work. So as part of the work that we will be doing, we will absorb a portion of the New Moo space that's currently New Moo, and then there's a conference room that's to the kind of smack in the middle of that. Yep, Wendy's got it. That is currently a shared conference room between town staff and New Moo, and that will transition to be all New Moo as part of this project. And then we take over the portion of the space that's closest to the bottom of the page here. So this work has been in progress and under consideration for a number of years. It was included, the concept of this was included in our in the 2020 lease renewal that was done for the New Moo. And so if you scroll down to the next slide, that actually shows that same area, but this is a graphic taken specifically from the lease amendment that was executed in April 2020. It's a little bit challenging to see this, I understand, but the moral of this story is, when you look at this more closely and see it on the screen, the footprint of what we are proposing, that what was on the previous slide in green, is the same footprint that was contemplated as in this 2020 lease amendment. So nothing has changed, and the footprint really was sketched out and pretty clearly defined. Since that time, staff has been working to develop the plans, refine the plans. As part of the work here, we also were looking at ADA restrooms that are not being considered as part of this work right now. We're not asking to award that, but we will be awarding reconstruction of the handicap ramp out to this lower level outside the town hall, because as you all know, this building has no elevator, so that ramp is the only handicap access to the lower level. So, so two major things happening: HR offices that impact a New Moo as contemplated in the 2020 lease, and the handicap ramp. And so we have been discussing and having conversations with New Moo, staff has. We provided a desk item today that responded to a number of the questions and comments that had come in from New Moo. Dan Keller, our facilities manager, is here with me this evening to help answer questions, and he's been seeing this project through since its inception. But specifically, I can run through some of the things we've been discussing with regard to timeline. Dan and I have met even just in the past 2 weeks with New Moo twice, in addition to having met with them over the summer. So we will be, if you agree to execute a contract tonight with the contractor, we will be, as a matter of fact, I'm sorry, this presentation is a little disjointed because we did it at the last minute, but the next slide actually talks about what the work plan is. There we go. That will help facilitate this conversation. So our next step, should you agree tonight, you'll execute the agreement with the contractor, staff will do that, and then we will get a project schedule from the contractor. So we will need to work with the contractor and talk with them about how we're going to move forward with the project, what their expectations are. One of the things we have discussed with New Moo is the idea of asking the contractor to build the wall that separates the spaces first, so that we impact them for the shortest period of time possible, and then the contractor can continue to work to build out the HR spaces. We don't know, we assume that's possible. We assume it may come with a cost, because it may require the contractor to change the work plan they had conceptualized. So we will work with them on that. I mean, we're willing to have that conversation. We think it's probably worth talking about. And we also have agreed with New Moo to evaluate the potential for a new door between the spaces. So right now our spaces are separated by one door. It's often locked, but it is the handicap accessible restroom for this level of town hall. So we do, as a town, need to be able to access that for public use. So we've talked about relocating and moving that door further into the New Moo space. Now, we haven't talked about this with the architect. We haven't talked about it with a building official or with the fire marshal or with the contractor to figure out what it would take to do that. But we agree that it's something that would be wise to consider. and evaluate as part of this work. We would hold a pre-construction meeting in which we would include NUMU and the HR team. So everyone who's in these spaces, we agree it's important that everyone know what's going on and what the schedule is going to be, and that the contractor understand our expectations and that we understand theirs. We will be hiring a moving company and coordinating the moving of furniture. We need to do that for HR. We've talked about, after our last meeting with the NUMU staff, Mr. Keller and I both talked about that and agree that it makes sense for us to move the NUMU furniture, office furniture as well. The contractor will establish work areas. They will have to have staging outside the building to store equipment and materials. But inside, we know that they will install plastic sheeting, floor to ceiling, wall to wall, to prevent dust mitigation. That's standard practice in interior construction. And then they will proceed with the construction, which will include all the phases you can imagine that it would, from demolition to painting and everything in between. The work areas will be cleaned before they are occupied. And then we would coordinate a move-in with a moving company. So our anticipated schedule for this work, the base work, is we anticipate starting mid to late November of this year and finishing in February 2025. All of that is tentative until we have a schedule from the contractor and we've talked through the timelines. So with that, I'll just hit a couple of the other highlights. We know and appreciate that one of the concerns for NUMU is security of their space. Completely understand and appreciate that. So we have agreed that we will make sure contractors are not allowed in there, and if they need to be in there, they will be escorted. We certainly can do that. We don't know if we can keep the door locked at all times because, again, it is the only handicap accessible restroom in this floor. And it also serves as a fire exit in some cases. So we're gonna need to think about that a little bit. And I think the rest of the stuff, we talked about dust mitigation, we talked about doors, yeah. So I think that kind of covers and encapsulates what our thinking as staff has been, and I'm happy to answer questions if you have them.
Thank you, Ms. Burnham. Questions? Councilmember Risto.
First of all, I just want to thank you. Like all projects, I think once it's proposed and then there's interaction with staff and residents, or staff and our people who are renting from us, I appreciate the thoughtfulness and the ideas that have come forward. I had one quick question about moving the door for the restrooms. Would that be envisioning so that the restrooms are on the other side of the door, so that when the museum is locked, when the museum is closed, there would still be access to the restrooms without breaching security to the museum? Or what would be the purpose of moving the door?
That is correct. It would allow staff to access it without, because right now staff walks through that door to use the restrooms, and the only thing that prevents us from entering the museum unauthorized is a kind of elastic cord, basically. So it would provide a hard barrier to keep staff from being able to enter, and vice versa, because I think right now the door from NUMU into the Civic Center is a push bar. So if NUMU is having an after-hours event, nothing's prohibiting their patrons from inadvertently or whatever, for whatever reason, accessing Civic in an unauthorized way. So I think there's something I think we all agree we should think about that a little bit more.
Okay, so to continue, the plan would be to have the restrooms accessible from either NUMU or the town, but having NUMU secure from anyone on the town side using the restrooms at hours when they're closed, and NUMU visitors from coming into the town quarter. So there'd be like two ways, it would be closed off on each side and the restrooms would be kind of in between?
That's the goal. I don't know if it will take two doors or if we'll be able to figure out a way that doesn't require two doors, but that is the goal.
Okay, thank you.
And we would still need to meet any kind of fire exit type of requirement, so that still has to be taken into account, but we're happy to explore this because we see it as mutually beneficial.
Councilmember Rennie, followed by Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mayor. So I want to step back for a second. This plan or the plan to use some of the Numu space is now getting to be several years old. And since then, I've heard other thoughts. Seems like they've developed since then. For example, we were trying to move more or all of the command staff and PD to the building on Los Gatos Boulevard. And so when I heard that, the first thing I started thinking about is, well, now we have a lot of empty space. This is a pretty big dollar amount. I'm trying, 450,000. I'm trying to figure out if that's all just to do this, because you've listed 3 projects which seem to all be the same thing. So that could be part of the question is, but have you really thought through from a master plan of the Civic Center, do we want to spend this money to move these offices here when we seem to be opening up space elsewhere that might be a lot less costly?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I appreciate it. It's a really good one. I think it's an important thing for us to talk about. I think the question of overall use of space and the condition of the Civic Center building is an important one that we do need to think about. And I expect we'll talk about it more when we talk about capital improvement program. I think the idea of moving PD staff to the POB is also an important topic. We in the capital program have funding for a space allocation study to see what it would take in terms of renovations at the police operations building to move staff in there. We're talking about moving 15 to 20 additional staff from Civic Center into the POB. It's not going to fit easily, and it's probably going to take some pretty major renovation to the POB. And this is my long-winded way of saying, I don't think we can move staffing, PD staff, out of Civic anytime soon. I think we're going to be looking at some pretty major improvements to POB to support that. So I think in the meantime, getting this space that is allocated for the HR team that we've been contemplating, I think is an important move. And I think it's important for staff. And we're talking about a net change in space of 139 square feet. That's all the town is taking from the existing Numu space as part of this renovation.
And second question, so this, all of the almost 500,000 is to just gain this space. Is that correct?
It's the ramp too, the handicap ramp out front that we talked about. That's included in the 450,000.
Okay, and so that's a separate project, but it's not what percent of the project is it?
It was a lump sum bid. Excuse me, I'm Dan Keller, Facilities Manager for Parks and Public Works. So it's a lump sum bid that was for both the ramp and the HR expansion.
I can only assume the HR ramp is not 50% of the cost. It's something much smaller.
The HR, so I would assume, we can work with the contractor to get a cost breakdown, but I would assume the concrete work is the bigger portion of the cost, because it's a lot more extensive and concrete's more expensive than building interior walls, generally speaking. And that is an ADA accessibility issue. So this building doesn't currently meet ADA code. That will bring it to current code.
Okay, well, that's why I'm sort of trying to get some feel for what is the cost of the moving the offices portion of it, because again, if I don't like to spend a lot of money. I understand what you're saying. Yeah, it's going to take a while, and so we kind of need this quick fix. But I don't want to spend a lot of money on a quick fix that we're going to later reverse. That's why I'm trying to understand it. So now you're telling me it's probably less than half of that.
Yes, I agree with Nicole on that. The ramp, the architectural estimate for the ramp was approximately 400,000, and the HR expansion was 300,000. And the bids came in. This bid came in significantly lower than that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I'm going to look to open public comment. I've got 2 speaker cards.
I have my
I'm sorry, I didn't see your hand up. You have a question, Councilmember Moore? Go ahead.
Yes, thank you. So I had a question about, so first I appreciate staff sharing with us some of the mitigation measures that have been taken to, minimize the impacts of this. On the just understanding what staff is asking here, there's at the security door portion of the staff report, there's a statement that staff is willing to consider and possibly recommend the change on the security door. Is that something you would be wanting from us tonight, or would a motion as was originally set on consent, would that be sufficient?
We are seeking the motion that's on consent, and nothing more. I think it was in the presentation trying to preemptively provide information about some of the concerns that were provided in written comment. So I didn't mean to confuse the issue. We're not asking for authorization to do any of that. We just need authorization to execute the contract. And then if we need to make significant changes to the contract beyond the scope of what we've asked for here, we would come back to council to request additional funding if needed.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm going to open public comment. Kimberly Snyder, please come forward.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Again, my name is Kimberly Snyder, the Executive Director for New Museum Los Gatos. I know it's late, and I appreciate you taking the time to have this conversation and consider the museum's request. All of us at New Mu appreciate the town's support over the years. And I'm here tonight to discuss Item 5, the Civic Center Improvement Project and its impact on the museum. I hope you all had time to read the letter from the New Mu staff and board included in the addendum. The lease was renegotiated and signed in the beginning of a global pandemic, when it was estimated 1 in 3 museums would shutter, and when the museum was still in its infancy. Over the past 10 years, we've demonstrated our value in the community, delivering exceptional award-winning programs and notable exhibitions with a relatively small budget and staff. The conversation tonight is much bigger than asking for a one-time mitigation fee. It is about the town investing in its cultural asset. And I want to point out the growth you've seen in the museum over the years is due in part to the town's support. Rent forgiveness during the pandemic, eliminating utilities during the renegotiation, and recently the Los Gatos History Grant have all been significant strides towards a relationship in which your community asset will grow. For any museum to be successful, we need support from community, from grants, and from our city. And we've been doing our part, raising private dollars to deliver our exhibitions and programs. The Civic Center Improvement Project greatly impacts the museum's operations. While the office reconfiguration may not seem like a huge project, it has a significant impact on us. And we've appreciated meeting with town staff over the past 2 weeks who have been working with us to address some of our concerns. However, we still will have to temporarily relocate our 8 workstations into our studio space, which not only requires movers to move in and out of our offices and staff time, but also will cut into our revenue for our workshop generating programs. The reduction in office space reduces the number of workstations in the museum office, forcing us to completely redesign the layout and purchase new office furniture. This project will take resources, and in order to mitigate the impact, we need your support. In the long run, the project could curtail our future growth. From the strategic plan interviews, visitor surveys, and even the town's strategic priorities, it's clear that our community wants more engagement, more events, and more community space. With limited office space, that means that we limit our space to grow, and our team, and our capacity. We're asking for tonight that the museum's needs to be seriously considered in the project budget for this proposal. Tonight, we ask you to continue to protect your community investment through a one-time mitigation fee and to start having the larger conversation on
Thank
how we
you.
can continue to grow together.
Thank you, Kimberly.
You're welcome.
Next speaker is Julie. Did anybody, oh, I'm sorry, we have a question, so you can keep speaking after he asks his question.
Thank you. So there was a response in the desk item
Yes.
From staff, and it seemed to me that there were some items in staff's report that maybe wouldn't be required in your proposal. And one of them was moving cost.
Yes.
And another one was protection of your assets.
Yeah, so we have been working with the town for security stuff. So that's something we're working together on. And the main concern is contractors going to the space without our knowledge or unchaperoned. That's the biggest concern, because we do have art and artifact of significant value, some that we own and some that are on loan to us. And essentially, if something were to happen during this time, the museum would be liable for this.
But there were items in your letter that itemized up to $50,000.
Yes.
Is that still the bill, or were there items that were addressed in the staff report?
The moving costs would be taken out if we can still have the conversation of hiring movers before and after.
Is that the only one?
Yes.
Okay. The one that I was interested in was the protection of the museum space, and the staff report called for putting up plastic sheets. My own experience is that they're not very effective. Sometimes the tape falls down, and we're not talking about just a residential space here. We're talking about, very valuable artifacts and artworks that are in the museum. And so I'm wondering if you think that the proposal for plastic sheeting is sufficient to provide the protection during the construction.
That's a really great question, and I'm not sure I can answer that right now. I know we've been trying to have a transparent conversation about what the risks are to the museum. I have not gone through construction that has been that close proximity, but I do think that warrants further discussion.
Thank you.
Councilmember Risto.
Thank you, and thank you, Kimberly. I had similar questions. I'll have a question for town staff on one, but in terms, okay, that's the town staff. Oh, in terms of loss of workshop time, if the wall is constructed first between NUMU and the town offices, I assume that reduces the amount of time that you would then be in chaos, because...
Yes. So if we can prioritize the museum construction happening first, that would greatly impact our ability to deliver workshops and programs. One of the issues that is coming up is that we do have to move out of the offices and into the studio space and move back. And one thing that we know about construction is I think that we've been talking about a 6-week schedule, and sticking to that 6-week schedule is important. And what is elongated or there's unforeseen types of construction is something to be considered as well. But if the museum section is prioritized, that would definitely mitigate some of our risk for lost revenue.
Right, and then that would be done, and however long the rest of it takes doesn't impact you.
Yeah, we'd have to move back and get the studio up and running, which all would take time.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks.
And then I had a follow-up. Oh, do you have a question for? Oh, okay. I'll ask staff my questions after.
Okay, Vice Mayor.
Yeah, I'm just looking at your letter. One of the items is rent for November, December, January of $6,000. Why should that be part of the request?
The thought process there was the inaccessibility of the space and the fact that we can't use our space to its full potential during the construction time. And depending on when the museum wall goes up, that could be a shorter duration. That was the logic behind adding it there.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Risto, did you have the question for staff at this point in time before we go to the next speaker?
Yeah, I guess just if I'm going to key off the point, so in terms of liability for any contractors going, I don't have any more questions for you.
Okay.
In terms of contractors, any loss to the museum, does the town have any kind of liability insurance or liability to that, or?
The contract that's proposed with the contractor has the contractor indemnifying the town for any claims. And so if the town were to get a claim from the museum, we would tender it to the contractor. Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay.
And then I guess along those lines also, in terms of plastic sheeting or however an area would be protected, are there standard practices for sensitive materials? Or, I used to work in a clean room, and I know if there had to be construction or something was opened, there are methods to seal an area off properly. And I don't know if that's been discussed or it's part of the contract that this is a sensitive area. It can't just be, the plastic sheet between the kitchen and the dining room while the kitchen's blown up. And I know what that kind of dust looks like because I'm still cleaning it up. So I have a question about how we would ensure that the museum would not be impacted with dust from our project.
Yeah, and I'm going to let Dan chime in on that, but I'll just offer that the space that we are working in there are doors on the spaces, right? There's a door on the new Moo office space that could be closed during construction. The conference room also has a door that could be closed during construction. So I think there's multiple layers that we could use to mitigate that, but I'd like to hear Dan's answer on the sheeting.
Okay, especially, dust does not respect doors.
So my goal would be to take as many extra steps as we can to make that airtight, keep the dust from going through. But we're only talking about the period of time that we build that wall. And Kimberly mentioned 6 weeks. That was a guesstimate on my part. We still haven't talked to the contractor, but we're hoping that we can get that wall up very, very quickly. And then the plastic can come down. We don't have to count on it. We close the doors Nicole's talking about, and we're in pretty good shape. That's
great. Thank you.
Okay, I have 2 speaker cards. Julie McAuliffe, followed by Joanne Rogers.
Thank you, staff and town council. My name is Julie McAuliffe. I am the president of the NUMU board, and I'm also a Los Gatos resident. And 4 years ago, NUMU was in a bind, and we thank the town for your support in that time when we were obviously in need of money and a chance of losing our museum. And your support throughout these few years has been tremendous, as you have seen us grow since then. We will be losing office space, and which is unfortunate because at the same time we're trying to grow as a museum, but we understand what we signed up for. So we want to make the best of the situation for everyone. HR's working conditions will be much better, and NUMU will work with our new space. It will take money, and yes, it's been, Nicole, you've worked with us, but that was a very short notice for us to come up with the amount of money that we need. Our office desk will not fit. They are large desks. We need to update our office in a more conducive, modern way that we're going to work together with 9 people in one area. So that we know is going to be costly. And NUMU, as you know, we don't have a big budget because we wouldn't be here if we had a big budget. What we are working toward endowments, we've gotten many grants. Kimberly and the staff have worked overtime. Unfortunately, the grants that we mostly get will not go to our operation costs. They go to our history projects, and they go to the arts, and they go to things that will enhance the town. Our office buildings will not enhance the town. The work that we do will. So I hope that you will consider tonight, we are asking for 50,000. We would like to be in the bid. We were not considered any cost when we were going out for the bid, but that might be too late now. But if we get a grant toward 50,000, or work with us for the expense that we're going to have to go through, for we all have good working conditions. So thank you for supporting the arts. We would not be who we are without the town support, and we are very, very grateful that we can all work together and strive for the arts and the culture of this town to only be getting better with time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Do you have any questions?
I see no hands raised. Thank you. Joanne Rogers, followed by Lee Quintana.
Hello, good evening. I just want to speak highly of our museum and say that they have had wonderful exhibits, and the art and the culture of the town is enhanced by having the new museum. I'd like to talk about the cost, though, of this project. I'm astounded at $450,000. We just did a ramp at the History Club, which was outside, and probably a similar distance. It was $40,000 for the ramp. We had $10,000 for the planter and $5,000 for the planting. So all of that was $55,000, and it looks, I think, really good. We have more work to do on the History Club, but I'm questioning, as Rennie did, about the $450,000. That seems like an awful lot of money, and I don't think that's quite fair for this project. But I just can't speak highly enough of Kimberly and the museum and having this in our town. I think it's wonderful. So, but think about those costs. I don't know if we've had other bids or not, but that seems too high in my estimation. Thank you.
Thank you. Lee Quintana, please come forward.
Good evening. I'm going to take I'm a member of the Historic Preservation Committee, but I'm speaking here as an individual and as a supporter of NUMU. When I first read the staff report, I had some serious questions. One was, I didn't know what the lease agreement was. I tried to find it online and couldn't. I went to the link for the plans. They were pretty hard to understand, and none of the issues that have been discussed here tonight had been included in the staff report. So my comments are more towards the process that has gone into this than the project itself, because many of my questions have been answered by the question raised by Rob Rennie and some of the other issues that were brought up. But my concerns are overall in the process, the transparency, the coordination, and the efficiency of it. Transparency, that it was hard to get that information from the staff report. The staff had not coordinated with the museum until 2 weeks ago, and the efficiency, because now we're looking at different options that may have to be looked at in the contract. In addition to that, the contract itself hasn't been broken down, so this question about how much is actually going towards the museum, how much is the ramp, and the total cost that was estimated in the staff report was not the total cost of those two projects together. There were additional costs that were not listed in the staff report. So those are all my concerns, and it doesn't just apply to this project, but it applies to a lot of projects where it comes to the council in a state where there's still too many questions that need to be answered, and that require extra work that should have been done before and other options presented at the same time. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any virtual hands on Zoom?
There are no hands raised on Zoom.
All right, would anybody else like to fill out a speaker card and speak to us on this item? See no one come forward, I'm going to close public comment, go back to my council members for comments, motion. Councilmember Risto.
Thank you. First of all, I'll make a comment. I appreciate this project is moving forward. I've been down to HR, and I think it's just horrible that their offices have no natural daylight. You know, they're down in a cave. You can't tell what time of day it is. The director was telling me they jokingly call it the casino because it's just the same all the time. And I'm sure our interim manager who took over for HR in the past knows what that's like down there. So I think this is a really important, humane thing to do. I can't believe we even have offices that don't have access to daylight. So I know that this is something we have to do. I fold this in with the thought that the Civic Center we've had the Civic Center building for a long time. We're starting to have to look at big improvements. The ramp isn't ADA compliant, so we have to do that. We've had issues with the AC. So separately, and I hope it comes forward with our CIP, but I think we're going to need maybe a Civic Center long-term plan of how long can this building last? What investment will it take that could we get 30 more years out of this building, and what kind of investment would that take? What would that look like versus building a new Civic Center, which other communities have done? That just seems like that's a huge cost, and maybe there's ways to keep this going, but I'll be interested in knowing what that is. I think in the meantime, we do have to do this ramp, and we have to do the HR offices, but as was brought up, don't know if it's going to be in a couple of years, 5 years, whatever. If PD moves into the operations building, then we've got this other open area, and what are our plans for reconfiguring that, and what can we do with it? So that's kind of separate from tonight's discussion, but it's tightly bundled to me, because as we make a decision to spend $400,000 and looking at all of the bids that were in the report, this was by far the lowest bid. I know that the longer you wait, the more expensive things get. If this project had been done before 2020, it would have cost less. Every single thing we do, the longer we wait, the more expensive it is, and the longer we have employees working in a cave. So, you know, I'm eager to get this moving forward. I'm also eager to see, looking into the future, what other changes we'll be wanting to make, and how can we do it with a mindset of this is the long-term view for how to improve the building. I sympathize with NUMU. I think impacts of construction are always unpleasant, and you know, from their perspective, this isn't even going to be happy construction because they don't get anything out of it, they lose something. However, that was the deal, regardless of how that came about, and you know, we have to take care of our employees while we take care of our tenants. As I look through the itemization, you know, I can understand the ask, although I think $50,000 is more than what it should be, and I think some of these numbers we can turn down. I mean, when I look at 3 months rent, it should probably be 1 month rent. I think the lost rental and workshop, you know, if we move forward and get that wall in place, instead of 10,000, it should probably be a third of that. I think all of these numbers can come down. The moving costs can come out. I don't deny that maybe the town should pay some fee toward you for your inconvenience as a tenant. I think a landlord should take care of their tenants in some cases. You did sign the lease, but I don't think in the lease it said that you were going to absorb the cost of all construction. So I do have some leaning toward some level of reimbursement, but not the full amount. I think, you know, maybe 20,000, or, you know, I haven't gone through all the numbers. I think it'll be a smaller amount. So that's where I am right now.
Vice Mayor.
Yeah, I agree with Councilmember Risto about the impact. And, you know, the town has a responsibility as the landlord, like any landlord, if you are doing construction and it impacts your tenant, you need to recognize that, and you need to be able to compensate them for the loss of value that they have in the rent that they pay. Now, I agree that, and I came in at a little bit different, but about $20,000 is probably in the range of what the actual impact will be. If, for instance, the furniture is, $20,000 and the old furniture won't fit, but the reality is that the museum will be getting new furniture out of that, and so I think that should be split. So I've come up with about the same conclusion, about $20,000. The area that I'm most concerned about, though, is the priority of doing this, as Councilmember Rennie raised. I was actually pretty surprised to hear that the police move was not, we don't have an estimate for it or a time frame for it, because I believe it was part of the strategy that the chief presented to us just a month or two ago. And so that also has very tangible public benefit in improving public safety by having our police force all together, and also some potential cost savings for that. So I'm really questioning the priority of this over moving forward with the police move. I know things don't always work smoothly and logically, but it just is a little surprising to me that we haven't prioritized the police move over this work. This will improve, obviously, the working conditions for some of our workers, but I think it can still be done. It just seems to me that maybe improving our public safety by moving our police into one location would be a higher priority.
All right, any further questions, comments from council members? A motion?
And then before the motion is made, the agenda tonight just listed entering into the construction contract. And so if the council were interested in voting on a payment to NUMU, my recommendation would be that that be added to a future agenda for action.
Okay. Councilmember Isto.
Okay, well then, one, I request that we put on a future agenda a discussion of how much and how to compensate NUMU for this project, looking through there. So that would be a request. Do we need a motion for that, or just I will request that the mayor?
It's just a request. We don't need a motion on that.
And then pull up the right report here now that I was over in the letter. Then I will move. I'm having iPad issues. Let me look at my iPad, and if someone else wants to make a motion before. All right, I'm ready. I move to authorize the town manager to award and execute a contract with Alex Kushner, General Inc. for the Americans with Disability Act Restrooms and HR Offices project in an amount of $450,000 as detailed in Attachment 1. I move to authorize the staff to execute change orders in an amount not to exceed 20% of the contract award amount, and approve the project construction plans with addenda. Implied with that or included with that, would that also include looking at moving the door and getting the wall in place? Will that fit under the mush that's in here?
So we will definitely explore it, but the costs are not baked into this, and it's not in the plan currently. So any major amendments to this will need to return should that come to fruition.
Okay, so this is my motion, and if those changes don't change the cost very much, they'll go forward, and if they do, then it'll come back to council. Okay, thank you.
Do I have a second? Okay, motion fails for lack of a second. Councilmember Moore.
Yeah, I'll second the motion.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any comments? I will ask Ms. Wood for a roll call vote.
Councilmember Risto?
Aye.
Councilmember Rundy?
Aye.
Councilmember Moore?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Hudas?
No.
Mayor Badami?
No. Motion passes 3-2, Vice Mayor and Mayor opposed. Okay, we are now moving on to council matters. And I am going to start with Councilmember Risto.
Okay, thank you. In the 2 weeks since we last met, I met with a large number of people, including NUMU executive and board members, some property owners, and a possible developer. I met with the president of the Chamber of Commerce and a developer for one of our pending applications, and a variety of residents on about our upcoming commission openings and ongoing developments and bike safety. I attended the League of Women Voters Pros and Cons. They had some live events. I attended one at the terraces of Los Gatos, and I'd recommend to anybody, as Election Day is looming and people are filling out their ballots, the League of Women Voters does put out a great resource where you can look online at my.lwv.org, and you can see the pros and cons, and they very nicely lay out what the ballot or what the proposition is, what it would do if passed, what would happen if it didn't pass, what the pros and cons are for each side, and who is backing the pro side and the con side, and how much money is on each side, because sometimes who's backing a proposal can tell you a lot about it. But it's a great way to just educate yourself, because we do have a number of propositions on the ballot. Last weekend, I worked at the St. Mary's Country Fair. It's always a great community event. Being there at the hydration booth when it was 100 degrees, I got to sell a lot of water and see members of St. Mary's, see parents I knew when my kids were little there, but also just see residents from across the community that come and enjoy this event. I was at Domus last Sunday for the one-year celebration. It's hard to believe they've been here a year. It's amazing to believe it's been a year, and they have all their holiday things in place, so recommend a visit. On the 10th, I attended the Rinconada Water Treatment Plant Reliability Project public meeting. So periodically, as the Rinconada Water Treatment Plant is going through a whole resiliency reconstruction, it's a huge project. They've been reaching out to all of the local residents below there, because this construction has an impact on the local residents. And so they answer all questions, give updates. They're 6 months ahead on the project, which is great. They're in phase 4, and it's a 6-phase project, I think. Could be 8-phase. But anyway, so it was just good to see what's happening and to see the residents' questions being answered and their needs being met. It seemed like a much friendlier meeting than the one I went to 9 months ago. On the 11th, I attended the Unhoused People Environment Summit by Valley Water. There were a number of stakeholders there discussing the impacts on the environment as well as on people by having unhoused living along our creeks, and best ways to address that, how to treat people with dignity while we're trying to also protect our watersheds. And then on the 13th, this past Sunday, I was in the library. So this whole week, today's Tuesday, all the way through Friday at the library, the Arts and Culture Committee has a whole display on, they're looking for, sorry, it's late. They're looking for public input on public art as they move forward with their arts master plan. So there's a lot of different displays in there. There's a map of the town. You can put pins in where you'd like to see public art. There's little places to put up Post-its of what type of art you'd like to see or what you'd like to encourage. Anyway, it's just kind of an interactive activity, and it goes through Friday, and then the Arts and Culture Commission will be taking that input as they start to work on their arts master plan. So very exciting. Get over there and give your input. Thanks.
Councilmember Moore.
Thank you very much, and thanks everyone for your flexibility for me to attend virtually. I held my council member community coffee at Gardenia, and if you haven't been to Gardenia, it is a great new spot in town where the Palms used to be. They have a really, really good menu. They're open for brunch, lunch, and I think now dinner. Definitely worth checking out. Had some good conversations at my community coffee. I met with the Union School District Superintendent Carrie Andrews, Dr. Carrie Andrews, and we had a really good conversation about how the town can work with the school district. As I've talked about in these meetings before, I really think that it's important to prioritize the Union School District and Campbell Union High School District, the way we prioritize our, Los Gatos named school districts, because at Union Middle School, about a third of the students are Los Gatos residents. So it's important. We talked a lot about a few different things that are impacting them. She's really enthusiastic about safe routes to school, so trying to do more for some of our elementary schools like Alta Vista. I met with the Los Gatos Chamber of Commerce CEO Jennifer Lynn. We had a great conversation about all things Los Gatos, and I think she's been doing a great job in that role. It's already been 1.5 years she's been doing that, so yeah, we're very grateful to have her in town. I attended an excellent Los Gatos Youth Commission meeting. This was the first meeting of the newly anointed chair and vice chair. And the Youth Commission is such a great group of young people, really, who are really there because they care. It's amazing to listen to them and the things that they care about. And I think they're going to have a really exciting work plan for us at our meeting in November. So looking forward to hearing more from them. I met with a variety of residents about different issues, mostly housing related, and to, double down on what Councilmember Risto was getting at. The election season is very much here. We will not have another council meeting before the election, so I really encourage everyone to get out and vote. I have been doing a lot of canvassing for candidates, and I've been very in Los Gatos, and I've been very surprised by some of my friends and neighbors who are not registered to vote. And so make sure you as much as you can, share online, talk to friends and family about voting, make sure that people are registered to vote and that people are actually informed on voting for all of the offices. As we know, as council members, we are at the bottom of the ballot. We are officially down ballot. And so while we don't have an election for council, it's important to make sure people know what they're voting for. So thank you all.
Councilmember Rennie.
Since the last council meeting, I attended the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Board meeting, and we had a closed session to work on the CEO's review. I think the thing of most significance, I guess, is for board meeting, we passed a support resolution for the climate bond proposition that's on the ballot. Thanks.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you. Number of activities related to Los Gatos Thrives Foundation and the planning for a new community center. I had an executive committee meeting with them, and then I supported the foundation through the movie that was on October 7th. It was a great turnout. It was great to see folks not just coming to a movie, but socializing. But the big thing was the workshop, which was the community center design workshop that took place last night. Over 100 people registered and provided input into what was important in the design for them. and also provided some input into 4 different possible location types. So not specific parcels, but places where we could put a new community center. It was also attended by some architects, and they gave us some insight as well. So great community engagement on that. Other things I participated in was the SourceWise, which is the Aging Commission. Very interesting meeting about what's going on across the county. And the other 2 things I did was the DEI Commission. I observed as much as I could. I was triple booked at that meeting, but it was an interesting conversation, and it was good to hear some of the tangible ideas that the DEI Commission is working on. And then last is I participated in the Cities Association of Santa Clara County board meeting. We suspended the nomination process because it wasn't necessary until January, but the meeting itself addressed a number of things, including transit and traffic and some updates on what's happening with that. So thank you.
On October 4th, I participated in Leadership Los Gatos, attending the first session of an 8-month program for the new class. Later that day, I met with Jim Foley of Pennant Properties. On October 5th, I participated in a ribbon cutting for the 25th anniversary of Kiss and Makeup. And later that same afternoon, I attended the City of Saratoga annual State of the City event. October 10th, I participated in another ribbon cutting for the 15-year anniversary of Therapy Works on Village Lane. I believe the Vice Mayor also showed up at that event. And this afternoon, I participated in National School Lunch Week at Blossom Hill Elementary School and handed out lunches with Paul Johnson, the superintendent of Los Gatos Union School District. That was one of the highlights of my year. It was just so much fun meeting all the students. They actually lined up to get my autograph, so I was really quite honored. Anyway, that's all I have. Town Manager, take it away.
Thank you, Mayor. Katie Nemariam, Town Manager. Just reiterating some of the things that were already mentioned, please come to the library. We invite the community to give their input on a public arts master plan through Friday. And as also was alluded to, there is no council meeting as normally scheduled on November 5th, so no one show up, no one will be here. And we will resume our council meetings on November 19th with our new Town Manager, Chris Constantine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. With that, this meeting's adjourned.